Hello friends, welcome to Universe of Narutox. If you love Naruto what if stories and anime explanations, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin today's story. Truly, the Land of Wind was a sight to behold. It wasn't just the sand, but the beauty of the horizon, watching the sunrise over the horizon. There was majesty here, even in this arid land that supposedly contained nothing but dust and death. One didn't have to look to appreciate this. It was all around them. Impossible to miss. Plain, yes, but wonderful to look at. Tamari had taken him out here a time or two, just before all hell broke loose. Funny how beautiful everything looked when the land wasn't cooler vised into volcanic glass. Nar couldn't help but marvel at the land as it flowed past them. An endless blur of sand dunes interposed by the occasional oasis or shrubbery. It was certainly beautiful in its own rustic way. The last time they had been in the Land of Wind, he hadn't had time to take in the scenery. Back then, he'd been focused on finding Gar, saving the then K's cage from certain death. How ironic, then, that this time their mission was not one of rescue, but to maintain ties with the very village he called home. At least it would be a few years down the road. And yet, this feels wrong. That's because it is, Manda rumbled angrily, the deep baritone of his voice reverberating through his scaly hide to tickle the Uchiha's toes where they lay. To think that I, the mighty Manda, would reduce to Fing You lot across the desert. His voice was almost a petulant whine as he slithered onward. Just because you were attacked once, well, that doesn't give you the right to summon me. These last words being directed to the summoner in question, Orochimaru. Come now, Manda. The pale shinobi soothed as he stroked the violet scales of their mount. I've already promised you your fill of any enemies we encounter, of which we have seen none since. Those scouts who ambushed us weren't even worthy of being mid-noon snacks. The snake's forked tongue flitted furiously at the mention of said attackers ground to gory smears on the sands behind them. Jiraiya and Naruto shared an amused look. As they recalled, Orochimaru had summoned the boss snake simply to scare the piss out of the Iwagakure shinobi. And it would have worked too had not Manda decided to flatten them merely for being in his presence. You couldn't scare someone when they were dead. Maybe you shouldn't have called him, Tsunade shouted to make herself heard over the rushing wind of their passage. You know how temperamental he can be. Nar seconded that motion. Yeah, I'm not too comfortable riding on the head of a vicious reptile that wants to eat me. It can't be helped. Orochimaru put in matter-of-factly. This is the only way to conserve our chakra. Jiraiya's toad summons and Tsunade's slugs would just dry out. Besides, no one would dare attack us with someone like him around. A wicked gleam entered his eye as he said this, confirming that at some point, enemy shinobi had in fact dared to do such a thing. This time, Manda had made short work of them. It was one thing to fight against the Lord of all Serpents, Naruto mused, having been one of the few to live to tell the tale. It was another thing entirely to have him on your side, however. And another still, to be riding on his head across a sea of sand, but to listen to him complain, "Yah. Scaleface, we heard you the first time. I've half a mind to just leave you here for that remark." The king's snake hissed, words slipping with his anger, tail thrashing in agitation. Oh, you wouldn't dare, Jiraiya replied with a grin. NYISS that, Orochimaru. Oh my, it seems he doesn't intend to cooperate. The soon-to-be-san inside theatrically, Naro-san, if you would what? Manda immediately bristled, fearing the worst. Oh, you know what? Grinned merrily. Orochimaru actually laughed at his summon's discomfort. Cuckoo. The Blackett almost smiled at that. Almost. Who knew the man had a sense of humor, but he went along with it, if only out of boredom. Leaning forward, he activated his sharing, allowing their ride to witness those blood-red orbs and triple Tamo, the latter spinning menacingly. Look into my eyes. You are getting very sleepy. No. The snake boss immediately jerked his head from side to side, terrified by the mere sight of the legendary dojutsu. There's no need for that. Fine, remind me to stay on your good side, kid. Jera snickered, penciling down a few notes on his pad. What you writing? Nar had a fair idea of what it was, but he asked anyway. Oh, this his soon-to-be teacher crolled softly. It's nothing, just a novel I'm working on. Wouldn't happen to be called Ika Paradise now, would it? Nar was suddenly looking over his shoulder, peering down at what had been written. Who told you? Jiraiya's reaction was nothing short of profound. The man looked as though he wanted to embrace strange him at the same time. It was Minato, wasn't it? It had to be that damned kid. Is he trying to ruin my life's work? Ma. Nar soothed the man's perverted rage with a wave of a hand. It wasn't the squirt. So weird to call his father that, sharing, remember. He tapped at his still red eyes, the trio of Tamo spinning eerily. I can just read your pencil strokes. From there, it was just a matter of piecing the letters together. And wait a minute. There was a long, pained silence as his brain caught up to what his eyes were seeing, and what he saw was not amusing. Why the hell is my name in there? You just switched the letters around. And isn't that Suna? Shush. The whitehead practically swarmed the blacket, clamping a hand over his mouth before he could finish that sentence. Do you want to die? Nar quietly considered what he'd seen her do to Jiraiya the last time he'd been caught peeping. It hadn't been pleasant. On second thought, perhaps silence was the best answer here. Why am I not surprised? Instead of attacking the pair, Sununade simply yawned. Only you would write a novel like that, Jiraiya. Lyle, the sage Daylard, shooting up again in outrage. That's right. Nar found himself unwittingly backing up his mentor. Don't step on a man's romance. A dangerous glint entered those hazel eyes. And what Preetle is so romantic about an EKY novel? Both men palled. Aha. Well, that is to say, Cuckoo, you really are two peas in a pod. Thanks for the distraction. Naruto heaved a sigh as he leaned back into the shade, trying to remind himself that man wasn't evil. Yet no, he chastised himself for the childish impulse. With the changes of made, he might never be. Once upon a time, he had stood on the side of good. It was a series of unfortunate and disastrous events that had led to the man's fall and his subsequent betrayal of Konoha. The first had been a lack of recognition. He'd felt that no one understood what he was trying to accomplish. More and more he'd felt himself growing apart from his comrades, lost in his pursuit of jutsu. When someone had put his name forward as a candidate for Hokage, he could only imagine the Sannin's relief. Then Minato had been chosen as Hokage instead of him. It had been the straw that broke the camel's back. In hindsight, he almost felt bad for the man. If Fat had her way, he could have turned out the same. Having so many indignities heaped upon him could truly be trying at times, being treated like a demon because of the Kalobi. No one respecting him. Nobody teaching him anything until he'd saved their collective asses countless times. Wait a minute. Why was he trying to save Konoha again? Because of your friends and family, right? That for once Naruto was grateful for Yami's interference. Sometimes a voice in one's head wasn't so bad after all. Ah, Yadukik. Ruthlessly suppressing his darker half. The blonde returned his attention to his fellow prodigy, resolving to at least make an effort. If the man could prove he had at least some small speck of goodness within him, then it might not be necessary to kill him off after all. Oh, he wouldn't hesitate if the time came. It was just that were Konoha to lose one of its most prestigious shinobi so early in the war, morale would suffer. His knowledge of the Second Shinobi War was admittedly spotty, only extending to what he remembered reading back in the academy. He knew that the war with Mist was correctly ongoing, and the aim would eventually get dragged into it. But beyond that, wait, that's it. The proverbial light bulb went off in his head, an idea forming from that last thought. Kuriger, they hadn't started their bloodline purge yet. That didn't happen until just before the Third Shinobi War, which meant a number of powerful bloodline clans, Hakus, for example, were out there somewhere, just beginning to suffer persecution under their mad Mizukage. And that persecution presented an opportunity, as did AIM, provided he was able to wheedle his way into tagging along on that mission. It would be difficult, but the chance of meeting Nagato, Yahiko, and Konan was simply too good to pass up. Clever, Yami snickered in sensing his thought, worming out from under the mental stranglehold Naruto had him in. Pull something like that off and you'll change a lot more than the outcome of this war. Nar silently agreed. If those three were brought back to Konoha instead of left behind, Akatsuki would never be born. No Akatsuki meant no Buju hunting. No BU hunting. No Moonsai plan. Easy there, Tiger. Already he was getting ahead of himself. His mind awhirl with the limitless possibilities this change could wreak. But for now, he needed to focus on the task at hand, surviving this mission and making it to Jonin. Once he did, reluctantly, he struck up a conversation with his old nemesis. So, got any students, Orochimaru? Unsurprisingly, that got a rise out of the pale shinobi. As a matter of fact, yes. Golden eyes gleamed with intrigue, a rare smile pulling at his lips. Her name's Anko, a promising apprentice, that one. But what of you? Surely you must have students of your own out there in the world there somewhere. Almost immediately, the Uchiha recognized the question for what it was, an attempt to probe him for more information. He smoothly deflected it with a shake of the head. Sneaky bugger would have to try harder than that if he wanted to learn his secrets. Really? Jiraiya asked, grateful for the distraction. Anything that kept Sade from snapping his spine like a stick was good in his book. Nar shook his head for a second time. Nope. That was the truth of it. He'd never had a student of his own. Unless one counted the lessons he'd given Konohamaru. I've been on my own for as long as I can remember. Never really occurred to me to teach anyone. Yano. You do know if we pass this mission, you'll be assigned a squad of your own. Interrupted as was often her wont. Understand. You'll be responsible for the safety of 3BRS. Think you can handle that? Ahuchiya. There was no venom in her voice, just an idle question. And yet, it chilled Naruto to his very soul. Though she'd since stopped hating him simply for who he was, those words of hers could easily cut to the bone when she wanted them to. He gulped almost audibly. The thought hadn't even remotely occurred to him that he'd have a team. Can't I just take one student like Orochi? The words were almost a plea. I'm not cut out to teach 3 kids. Really, I'm not. Cuckoo. I'm afraid not, said Shinobi shook his head lightly. Long glossy hair swaying. We geniuses can only instruct 1 student at a time. Nar hissed. You're getting 1,000 years of death for this. But then he thought of something. You know what? You're right. He grinned. Beta Lil. Enko grows up to be just like Ya. A genius without peer. I was thinking more along the lines of batshit crazy, but there was no rancor behind that word. And Jiraiya smiled at the subtle jibe, but ultimately it was Orochimaru who had the last laugh, literally. Not that unverbing chuckle that so often set Naruto on edge during his youth, but a genuine sound of actual amusement. Whatever had made him into an old cruel codger in the future doubtlessly hadn't fully taken hold yet. You couldn't fake a laugh like that. Still snickering at the hellraiser that little girl would undoubtedly grow up to be, Naruto turned his gaze to the desert once more. That was when he noticed something. Hey, is it just me or are we slowing down? Indeed, Manda's almost frantic pace across the desert had slowed to a constable crawl, much to the serpent's consternation. In fact, there hadn't been any sand for a while now, the storm having ceased during their discussion, which meant that they'd either reached solid ground unlikely unless there was an oasis nearby, or that the ground had turned to clay at some point without their knowing. Such a thing was unheard of in this sweltering climate, as was the appearance of an entirely unexpected element. Mud. Manda's indolent cry of rage confirmed everyone's fears, his movement grinding to an abrupt halt as he found his many coils trapped in a swamp in the middle of a desert with no oasis for miles in either direction. The trap couldn't have been more obvious if there had been a neon sign saying trap in bright bold lettering. Ah, Christ. Jiraiya was already rising, pocketing his notepad. There's no way there'd be mud way out here in the desert. You know what that means. Cracked a knuckle. Orochimaru merely chuckled. Another ambush. H again. That was the only word Naruto got off before everything exploded. Looking back, he didn't know whether to give the explosion corps of Iwagakure credit for surprising them or lacing the ground with that many mines. The deadly ordnance culminating in a massive geyser of smoke and flame that seemingly slew the shinobi on the spot. Or so the enemy hoped. Perhaps it was the smoke and sand kicked up from the explosion. Perhaps it was because the group had been expecting such an attack the moment they'd set foot into Wind Country. Perhaps they'd even prepared for such an eventuality by summoning Manda in the first place. Whatever the case, they'd clearly underestimated Manda's skin. The moment Orochimaru had realized what was about to happen, he'd ordered his summon to coil around them, his massive hide weathering the punitive blasts with an eerie level of ease. Did we get them? An angry and very feminine growl deep inside the snack dashed those hopes. I'm going to kill them. Roared. Well, this is embarrassing. Jiraiya murmured blackly. They almost got us there. I take it back. Naruto's muffled voice resounded from within the serpent's protective embrace. Snakes are awesome, aren't they? Orochimaru seconded merrily. Manda, if you would. The king of snakes hissed angrily in agreement. His Jaden eyes fixed firmly on the fools who dared to scuff his hide with their tiny to him explosives. Still hissing, he reared back, disgorging the quartet he'd sheltered all this time. None of them looked pleased at having come so close to death. Prepare yourselves. Pray. When those coils slithered open, some of the Iwa shinobi actually sobbed in fear. Then all hell broke loose. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Nar immediately flooded the area with clones, ignoring the baffled looks he received from his teammates. It was weird seeing so many Uchiha like that. His efforts wiped away those looks, however, as a horde of Iowa shinobi erupted from beneath the Lami soil to engage them. Ah, but that was the beauty of the Sharingan. Of the 24 enemy ninja that arose to slay them, their number was almost immediately carved in half by the doppelgangers and their equally lethal reflexes. Another 3 instantly fell to Mandanda's writhing tail, and 2 more were down by Enwen Jutsu, who knew the old man had it in him, courtesy of Jiraiya. That left one Tasanadi, a devastating right hook, shattering the jawwood by the rest of a face of the lone Asin who dared attack her. That left a Polri 7 in attendance of the force that had intended to ambush and kill them. Far better odds for 4 elite ninja and a very angry snake. Naruto stiffened as he recognized one of them. A man whom he had personally never met before, but who had been described to him by Sai, a quiet shinobi who killed his enemies with a single punch, blowing them apart with devastating detonations. He stood there at front of their little vanguard, eyes narrow and face grim. Nar almost didn't recognize him without the telltale signs of the reanimation, but there could be no mistaking him. Gari, that earned him a frown. You know me, Uchiha. The man's voice was like rough gravel scraping across the sands, coarse and dry. All eyes turned to Naruto. Yeah, what's the deal? Jiraiya frowned. The silence of Tsunade and Orochimaru was telling. His brain hissed. Lie. Who in Konoha doesn't know of you? Nar shot back, dipping into his faux persona of Uchiha arrogance with an ease so effortless it almost frightened him. Gari of the blast release. You're something of a legend up in Earth Country, aren't you? They say you obliterated a mountain with one punch. That much was true. He'd done a bit of reading back in the library when it became apparent that he might be facing old foes in this day and age. Never had he been so glad for books. I could say the same of you, the older man drawled, thumbing his chin. They say you're something of a living legend yourself. Ma's descendant, right, you got me there. Nar raised his hands in faux defeat. Since we both know each other so well, perhaps we can come to some sort of agreement. What are you suggesting? Walk away. What? No one has to die here today, Gari. Nar repeated his warning, flaring menacingly. Walk away. We can go our separate ways and forget this ever happened. He had no stomach for any more violence today that he could avoid pissing off I with this gawker early on. Then he had a much better chance of making peace later on. If you attack us now, you'll just die with the rest of your men. I don't know about you, but I'm not a fan of pointless deaths. So, walk away like you let my men walk away. Did he mean the scouts from before or the men they'd just slain? It didn't matter. They attacked us first, he said. Wasn't my call. Gar's frown deepened. And this as Naruto glared bloody red daggers at Tsunade and Orochimaru, daring either to object. Surprisingly, neither did Jiraiya. Had a contemplative smile on his face as though he were secretly enjoying the whole thing. Bloody bastard probably was. And why the hell was he taking notes? Suppressing his ever-present temper, the former blonde turned his attention back to the Iowa shinobi. It is, he nodded at last. To his credit, the man actually looked as though he was considering the offer. Then he frowned. As tempting as your offer is, I'm afraid I'll have to refuse. On what grounds? On the grounds that the such wants you dead. He pantomimed a gesture at Nar. And in that same instant, a black blur flashed out of his sleeve. Nar narrowly recognized the shuriken for what it was before he caught it in his teeth. God, that never got old. The looks on their faces were always the same. How the hell did he do that? As much as Naruto hated having a dojutsu, he had to admit that it was unbelievably useful when it came to dodging enemy projectiles. Well, that's not fair at all, Gari groaned, realizing his preemptive strike had failed utterly. Sorry, Nar grinned around the deadly star, spitting it out not a moment later. We don't give a here that, Jiraiya. We're so important. They want us dead. He laughed blindly to himself, idly unaware that this would soon become a common occurrence for their little group. Well, we are pretty famous. Orochimaru chuckled and tucked a hand through the ebony curtain of his hair, uncaring as Manda disappeared in a plume of smoke. Indeed, you guys really know how to treat a girl. Covered her mouth and sifted a smile of her own, not one to rise above such petty mockery. So, I guess you're going to try to kill us now. Naruto his head aside, masking the regrets he felt at ending so many lives. It was a shame really. Sparing Gari would have been a powerful gesture of his mercy back in Earth Country. Ah well, couldn't win them all. Gari took one look at the ease with which they accepted his aggression and frowned. Perhaps this was a mistake after all. But he had his orders. The risk of someone like merging with the Uchiha was too great a threat to be brokered. Any child produced from such a union would be horrendously strong. It wasn't anything personal really. Just a matter of business. In any case, his objective was clear. Eliminate the Uchiha and or the Senju before that could happen. Their Tsuchikage would have had him kill both, but the captain knew he'd only have one shot at this. But although he and his men held the advantage barely in terms of numbers, they clearly stood in the shallow end of the pool when it came to raw talent. Here he was about to face down three shinobi who would one day be known as the Sannin and an Uchiha capable of unquantified levels of destruction. It would be no mean feat for him to kill one or the other. Not with two of Konoha's best standing at their backs. His chances of survival were slim at best and non-existent if he failed in his task. Honestly, that was almost enough to make him reconsider the man's offer and return home with his head intact. Troublesome. As if that word was the linchpin, the enemy shinobi swarmed forward at the others. But not Gari. He made a beeline right for Naruto. The blacket blanched, barely managing to shout a warning over the chaos. Whatever you do, don't let him touch you. That was all he had time for before the man closed with him, and they engaged in a blistering barrage of taijutsu. It was easily apparent he intended to make this a close-range fight. Refusing to accommodate him or risk contact with the enemy shinobi, Naruto blurred backwards, eyes pinwheeling wildly to watch his adversary's movements for an opening. It wasn't easy. Gari was a good deal faster than what he remembered, pursuing him relentlessly, refusing to allow him even a moment's rest to use Enjutsu. It was all he could do to stay out of the man's exceptionally long arms. Arching backwards, he silently swore when the man tried to clobber his head off. He knew even the lightest contact could be deadly with what little chakra Kurama had left him. It was very likely that any explosion could be fatal. He wasn't willing to risk regenerating an arm or anything major. If this man injured him, it would likely permanent even with Tsunade's aid. Of course, he didn't need both hands to call upon that vast repertoire of Enjutsu that was his own. As a matter of fact, one technique sprang to his mind just now. Sweden Miserappa water-style wild water wave. Gari hadn't been expecting an Uchiha to suddenly spit water at him. One moment he'd been trying to land a telling blow. The next a terrific impact slammed into him and bowled him head over heels. He wouldn't realize what had happened until it was too late. By then his adversary had the distance needed to launch another assault. He flung a palm forward, an invisible current leaping forward to violently swat the larger man from his feet. Futon Reposo wind-style gale palm. Battered by the sudden surge of wind, Gari found himself bowled over, tumbling head over heels across the sands. As luck would have it, he toppled to a halt directly next to his mission objective. The man almost could not believe his luck. The Uchiha's attack had left him lying at the feet of a very surprised Tsunade. The blonde having only just finished off one of his men. Chance. He lunged upward. Got you. Tsunade made the mistake of trying to finish him, then striking at the man's unprotected flank with a brutal right haymaker. Nar shouted a warning, but it was already too late to intervene. In a move that shouldn't have been possible, Gari twisted aside and sned her wrist, stopping her assault cold, her knuckles just brushing the bridge of his nose. Jiraiya froze. Naruto froze. Even Orochimaru made a sound of dismay, unable to believe that someone of Tsunade's level had been stopped. Gari could have blown her arm off right then and there, but he didn't. Too late, Naruto realized exactly what he intended to do. He darted forward, but the way was suddenly barred by two enemy shinobi. Don't. Sorry, Gari murmured contritely, his brow hardening in concentration. Bakuden, explosive release. He said nothing more as he simply drove his fist into the blonde's stomach, the blow detonating explosively and throwing her backwards. Any other shinobi would have been obliterated on the spot. But Tsunade merely had a gaping hole where her midsection should have been. Fatal, deadly, mortal. No one could recover from a wound like that. Not even Tsunade. Dead, gone, decised. These three words flicked through Naruto's mind like the embers of a dying flame. He saw red, great, unholy red. Countless memories of her in his youth flitted through the fog of his mind. Good and bad times, both shattered by her passing. Shebin was still one of his precious people. No amount of time travel could change that. Not in his mind. But nowadays his fault. He'd killed her. She was dead because of him. He might not have dealt the telling blow, but the blood was on his hands. It was all his fault. His fault. His fault. All his fault. His fault. A lone tear of blood trailed down out of Naruto's right eye, followed soon by his left. A slow trickle that stung every so slightly as he blinked the red tears away. Something stirred inside of him as he laid eyes upon Gari. In that moment, something dark, bleak, ancient, and so very angry. A power he had dreaded touching awakening from the moment he'd awoke in this body. But now it was there, free, alive within him. He could feel the tendrils of black chakra writhing behind his eyelids, eager and waiting to lash out at their master's preordained target. Infuriated, Naruto gave them that target. Amaterasu black flames burst into existence upon Gar's right arm, staggering him. He was screaming almost before he even knew what was truly happening to him, unknowing of the horrors that had just awoken within the new. One momentsate of the senju was falling away from him in a broken heap and the next the sleeve of his right arm was burning and scalding the skin beneath. He tried to smother them with an earth jutsu but they just burned even brighter, spreading from arm to shoulder then to his chest, slowly roasting his entire body despite his efforts to temper the intangible inferno. It burned. Oh, sweet Kami, did it burn? He called for his subordinates. They didn't answer. None of that mattered now. He had to find a way to get rid of this hellish fire before. Ba-dum. When he looked up, the Uchiha was all but towering him. Bloody eyes boring holes into his flesh through his very soul. He stood stark against the sun, his form little more than a shadow. Except for the eyes, those eerie awful eyes, there was no mercy to be found in those sinister scarlet orbs. Not a single sliver of decency to which he could appeal. Should have taken the offer. But the realization came too late. The chances of Naruto being merciful after the death of his teammate were non-existent. He was going to die, Gary realized. And there was not a damn thing he could do to stop it. And then his world was gone. His perception was trapped by those spinning Tamo. All control severed from his body in an instant. For perhaps the very first time in his life, Gary experience fear outside the presence of the Sandaime Tsuchiya. This man, he wasn't a man at all. He was a monster. Still, his body burned, but even that failed to hold a candle to the cold pit of dread opening in his stomach. His would-be killer said only one word then, and it was a word that promised complete and utter pain. Tsukuyomi. Gary opened his mouth to say something, anything before this devil of a man ended him. All he managed was a wet-sounding gurgle. As his world fell away, a world of red skies and black water opened up beneath them a heartbeat later. But when he looked back, the Uchiha wasn't alone. Rather, there were more of him. Dozens, no, hundreds. He was beginning to think that he should have ended him first. Doubtlessly, whatever he'd done had stripped away the last vestige of honor in the man, because each of those clones bore a weapon, and he wasn't liking where this was going. Where am I? He demanded to know. What have you done to me? I tried to be civil, the Uchiha whispered, his words a breathless hiss as though he were barely reining his anger in. Tried to let you walk away. And this is the thanks I get. You should have run. Run while you had the chance. Fool. Stupid. Stupid fool. That was when the first of many kunai descended from on high, pinning him to a cross that hadn't been there before, yet now suddenly was. Gary tried to move to break free, but found himself inexplicably bound, his hands and feet crucified by the deadly knives. Nar advanced upon him then, and his silent army moved with him. Oh, don't worry, he began almost Amiya, the sudden mood swing causing Gary to start. I won't let you die. Yet first, you get to suffer, Gary cried out in pain. And yet the assault continued, extending in a series of slashing stabs designed to inflict maximum misery and suffering. Once, 2, 3, or was it more, 6? Too many to count. Over and over and over they fell upon him. An endless cycle that took his arms, his legs, eyes, and organs, eviscerating him in every way possible, leaving him on the edge of death. Still this torment continued, extending from hours to days and days to weeks and weeks to months for years and years and years. Just like that, he was back in his body again, the genjutsu having ended. The Uchiha still stood proud and tall over him, utterly unfazed by the mental slaughter he'd inflicted on the lesser shinobi. Poor Gary, he was not so fortunate in that regard. He could barely string so much as two thoughts together now, let alone speak. Glassy eyes stared up at his tormentor, having years of torment in as little as 10 seconds. He was broken now in every sense of the word, assuming he somehow survived this encounter. He'd never be a shinobi again. Jiraiya whistled softly at the sight. That was the Mangekyo, wasn't it? He'd heard of such things, but to see the legendary black fire firsthand was something else entirely. The kid wasn't even looking at him anymore, and the body was still burning. Nar nodded mutely. He didn't want these eyes. He'd never wanted them. As if sensing the man's distress, the whitehead turned aside. Good, he muttered, cringing at Sununade's still form. Hope you made the bastard suffer. Orochimaru felt a small smile tug at his lips. Such prowess. You should kill him, Naruto-kun, he suggested. Nar said nothing as he stared down at Sununade's killer. Then the black Tonto bit into his neck, and he knew nothing more. The cut was swift and merciful. Gary, what little remained of him, was dead almost before his gaping visage even struck the ground. Death was a mercy for him after what he'd been through. Now, ordinarily, the loss of their leader and the awakening of a Manekyo sharing would have galvanized the remaining ninja to retreat, especially after what had just occurred. But instead of doing just that, the remaining enemy shinobi weaved through a rapid series of signs and disappeared, their forms rippling away into the earth. That was when the mud came to life around them, swelling up in the facade of a dozen upon dozens of mud and earth and clones, each a perfect duplicate of the originals. Each bore a weapon hardened of rock, be it sire, sword or kunai, each equally deadly in their own right. They would rather die with weapons in their hand than risk the wrath of their such. Well, damn, Jiraiya muttered, drawing a canny of his own. That's not fair at all. Move. His warning came just in time as each of his clones, many having survived thus far, drew breath, needing chakra in their stomachs and exhaling in the next instant. So much for subtlety, Gaku no Jutsu. The ensuing fireball that followed was nothing short of massive and effective. Several of the bunch outright disintegrated upon contact with the rowing inferno. Turned out a few of them weren't clones after all. Screams of pains resounded through the inferno, only to be cut off just as quickly. By the time it had cleared, only a handful were remaining. Evidence of a single controller rather than several. That made things easier, especially with Mandanda's absence. Much easier. Watch where you're aiming. Jiraiya's shout beard him. The words fell on deaf ears as Naruto threw himself back into the fray. He spotted one of the supposed clones and swarmed him with taijutsu. He didn't care whether the man had a sword that it was drawn and ready. He was too filled with rage. Pain slashed across his right arm almost immediately as man got a lucky slash in. But he pushed past it, grabbing the blade with his wounded hand and jerking it aside to open the way for a kunai. The man went down with a wet gurgle, eyes rolling back within his skull as the Uchiha overwhelmed him, striking with a well-placed knife to the head. There was no blood. Wait just a minute, the Uchiha said in angst, watching as his opponent crumbled to lamy soil before his eyes. His eyes widened, realizing he'd lost sight of the real foe. Nar immediately spun towards Orochimaru and Jiraiya, both of them occupied fighting the other clones of the shinobi. The other two copies, seemingly aware of the imminent escape plan, noticed Naruto right away. "Oi, he's escaping," he hurriedly yelled, trying to find the original amidst the horde of Bunchon that had arose. But there was too much chakra strewn across the battlefield, and the enemy had hidden himself. Well, blast it. The bugger was going to get away. No, he isn't. A hard crack snarled through the air, accompanied by a bone-chilling scream of pain. Abruptly, the clones dropped, deprived of the chakra controlling them. The boys blinked, turning their attention to the source of the sound towards a woman they had believed to be dead. Narked, his clones vanishing with a resound poof of smoke. But how? How the hell was that possible? Battered and just a touch bloody Sunsade, Sanji held aloft her prize, a stout ill-looking man bearing the crest of Iwagakure upon his tattered Hishiot. Her grin was nothing short of beatific, as though she'd just won a poker tournament rather than secure an enemy shinobi. It certainly didn't help that the man was clutching at his now bleeding genitals in obvious pain. The three males shuddered in silent sympathy to the castration the fool had soothed, each knowing it could easily have been one of them. "How in the hell are you alive?" Jiraiya gawked. "What? You thought I was dead?" The blonde drawled, thumbing her forehead. "Please, did you forget about my seal?" Naruto couldn't help but gulp at the sight, both that of the now neutered man and the marks read the one who had made him a Enoch. In his anger, he'd completely forgotten about her yin seal. Recovering from a wound like that was nothing for someone like her. That didn't stop him from striding forward, and it certainly didn't deter him from doing perhaps the most reckless thing in his life. Without even thinking of his action or her potentially violent reaction, he stepped up, swatted the man's broken body out of her grasp and embraced her. "You reckless idiot." Immediately, she stiffened against him. But it was shock, not anger that stilled her body. What the hell was going on here? Were those tears in his eyes? They were. She'd only been down for a few seconds. Did he really think she'd been? And even so, what was with this reaction? They had only known each other for a few days, and here was hugging her. Nar couldn't see her face with his chin over her shoulder. Had he been able to do so, he would have witnessed the impossible. Sununade's face burning bright than the Suna sun overhead. You don't ever do that again." Nar pulled back to arm's length, her flesh fading as those still scarlet orbs bored holes into her unbidden. Her heart skipped a beat. They were quite different from what she remembered, preserving the trio of Tamo after a fashion now trio of circles rimmed by 3 bars, as if they had undergone an evolution of some sort. Even as she looked on, they faded, turning onyx once more. He shook her then, an irritated growl leaping from his throat to drag her back to the present. "Do you hear me, Sunsunade?" Another shake. Never again, but ever. The sheer violence of his statement took her back. Hunady had never been shouted at like this before. Not since her genin days with Surtobi sensei. And even then, she usually did most of the shouting. Having a man yell back at her, professed genuine concern over her well-being. Well, that was a new one. She didn't know how to react or even what to say. Few had dared stand up to her since she'd acquired her monstrous strength. Those that had were still nursing bruises. For this Uchiha Naruto, someone she barely knew. To demand she not risk herself in battle was so ludicrous she'd literally been stricken speechless. She felt like a frightened genin beneath his gaze, nervous and skittish courage all but deserting her as she stared into the dark depths of those angry eyes. It was terrifying. To her infinite surprise, she demurred. "Hi, Yash." Just like that, the fierce expression was gone from his visage, leaving him patting her firmly on the shoulder like a proud parent. "I'll hold you to that, Sununade-chan." Somehow, she couldn't find it within herself to protest the suffix. Perhaps that was for the best. She had no way of knowing what the moment would lead to in the near future, nor the chaos that it would cause, for a seed of doubt had already been planted in the back of her mind, and soon it would take root. Naruto had been concerned about her. More than just the concern of one teammate to another. If the two of you are quite done, you may wish to check his eyes. Orochimaru interrupted. Jerked back as if she'd been burned. What about them? He awakened the Mangekyo at the time of your death and used it most strenuously. The prodigy put in primly. It would be wise to make sure his vision hasn't deteriorated. You should have seen him. Jiraiya seconded with the slightest of smiles. The second you went down, he went apeshit on the guy. Nar hissed mildly offended. Traitors, both of you, we agreed not to talk about that. To her surprise, the two men had the decency to look contrite. We thought she should know. Orochimaru returned looking slightly hurt. Wow, was that even possible? Yeah, kid. She deserves to know, Jiraiya added. S gaze snapped back to him. Hazel eyes pine on the Uchiha. Her grandfather had beaten everything about the sharing into her brain. She was one of the few who knew its secrets, such as the fact that one only awakened the Mangekyo when someone dear to them perished or they killed their best friend. Clearly, Nar hadn't done the latter, which meant, is this true? Her voice was dangerously flat. Nar almost quailed at the sound of it. Yeah, well, I thought you were, let me see. Her inner medic taking over, Sununade reached for his visage. Nar immediately flinched aside. Oi, stop squirming, you big baby. Nar grunted as she seized his face in hand, his sharing flaring unconsciously. She tilted his head side to side, inspecting them. The crimson orbs followed her every movement, those barred eyes regarding her just a touch too closely for her liking. They'd stopped bleeding, she realized, trying to look at it from a clinical point of view. To do anything else would allow her to think, to realize the awful truth, he activated them because of me. He's going to go blind because of me. Because of me down, girl, we are not going there. Not with a man you barely know. A hot flush crept up the back of her neck that had nothing to do with the sun heat. She stubbornly pushed the thought away and addressed him. Any pain in your eyes? No, Nar admitted. Blindness. No. Dimness of vision. Nada. Wait a minute. Nar actually paused at that, his bayest smile fading. Was it possible that he already had the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan? This was Moa after all, and these were his eyes. If they were already eternal, then their problem was solved. The fear of a loss of vision was virtually non-existent. But how could he be certain? The only way to do that was to use the Mangekyo over and over again. Yet in doing so, he might draw a suspicion to himself, make others wonder why he wasn't losing his vision. This boded some thinking. Later, not now. Ruthlessly, he put his mind back on track. Fair enough, but if you ever shake me like that again. Her expression was nothing short of thunderous. Naruto laughed merrily. Hey. You're really scary sometimes, Chan. A sly knowing smile tugged at the blonde's lips. What? Don't tell me you're afraid of a little aggression, Naruto-kun. Not at all, unless Orochimaru would like to volunteer. The prodigy suddenly turned about 3 shades of white. No need for that. Just like that, the balance was restored between them. The moment of tenderness gone, but not forgotten. Would never forget. She filed that look away in the safe that was her mind, locking it away until those charcoal orbs reflected such concern for her again. As far as she knew, they wouldn't. But that brief moment of dominance on his part had sparked something in her. He'd shouted her down, demanded that she not risk her life unless it was absolutely necessary. Yes, his comments had incensed her. And yet, the sentiment touched her. Nar would have laughed again, but everything was suddenly blurry. It wasn't his eyes. He simply felt dizzy. When the hell had he sat down? Why was he covered in blood? Why couldn't he move his arm? Belatedly, he realized what was happening. His body was going into shock. But from what? He hadn't even been injured. That was suddenly at his side. Her anger forgotten. Your arm. You're bleeding. T is just a flesh wound. Naruto tried to reassure her, but found the words slurring between his teeth. Was this what it felt like to be injured? To not regenerate? He knew that Shinobi had cut his arm, but with that anger at the time, the adrenaline, he simply hadn't paid any attention to it until now. Apparently, he'd been cut deeper than he'd thought. Baka, it was like being chided by Sakura all over again, except this time, it was the master instead of the student admonishing him for pushing himself too hard and ignoring his injuries. Was that a touch of fear in those hazel orbs? No, surely not. This version of would never be afraid for him. He must be engaging things. Stay still, she hissed. You've lost a lot of blood and the muscle is damaged. Tisking, she pressed a chakra-covered hand to the wound. I can repair the latter, but you'll have to take it easy until your body can replace what you've lost. That means no more Manekio for the next 24 hours. Yes, Mom. That earned him a swift swat on the head. Call me that again and I'll knock your block off. Don't look now, Jiraiya murmured. But we've got company. Naruto's head turned to find a lone shinobi striding through the sandstorm. Another enemy. His fears were only slightly allayed when he saw the headband. Suna. He was from Shuna. The barely even of age. Dark eyes wide beneath a mop of pale russet hair. Dust the color of gold itself seemed to swirl around him. A silent shield protecting the youth from the harsh elements. A moment of terse silence passed between the five of them, each waiting for the other to speak. Surprisingly, the boy was the first to comply, his voice little more than a dry rasp, though whether from lack of water or simple surprise, they knew not. He looked just as surprised to see them as they were him. However, you're the envoy, I trust. The welcome they received at Sunagar was surprisingly quiet, if not simple, in Naruto's mind. A sandstorm had blown up shortly before their arrival, so perhaps that explained why there was no fanfare to welcome the four of their arrival. No trumpeting of horns or banging of drums for which the envoy might be heralded. Only a smattering of what probably passed for Suna Anbu and what he assumed was a village council were there to greet the Yanin at the gate, and even then they seemed more somber than excited to greet their guests in their clothes. Naruto almost bowed at the thick garments they wore, swaddled as they were from head to toe in thick clothing to keep out the elements. It almost made him feel underdressed in his shinobi fatigues and cloak. Granted, he had seen similar garb in Suna before, but this was bordered on outright X-ring. Only the Anbu in their sandy-colored uniforms were any such exception, and their masked faces betrayed absolutely nothing. A mere handful shinobi probably were not dressed so, but his eyes ghosted over and failed to recognize any of them. Greetings, one of the women bowed lower, her face creasing in what Naruto hoped was a genuine expression. I am Shio of the Sand. We welcome you to Suna. Her gaze strayed to the boy who'd found them back in the desert and a frown formed. Hiro-sama, you were told not to venture out alone. I was bored. The redhead demurred with shrug. Besides, I was rather curious to see these vagabonds for myself. That is no way to treat our guests. Another shrug from their escort. Naruto's mind, however, was elsewhere. The woman's name hadn't been lost on him, not in the slightest. Grandma Chio. It took every fiber of his being not to start in surprise. Chio was young, a good deal younger than he remembered her to be. Well, damn. Now that he looked at her, he could kind of see the resemblance. But to see an old face like that, someone who he knew was dead, yet in this time alive and well, it was just a little bit chilling. Oh, right. Manners. He really needed to work on that. Or you could butcher them. Yumi interjected snidely. Just saying it is our honor to be here amongst the sands. Naruto ignored and returned with the traditional sunabo. Something Sununade had all but beaten into him before the set outie. A murmur of surprise rippled through a few of the elders passing through the congregation like an unseen wave. In Uaya with manners no less. Naruto held the bow a touch longer than was strictly necessary, essentially showing that he was deferring to their leadership for the duration of their stay. And Uchiha with honor. Hiro murmured beside Bayist. I wasn't aware such a thing existed. Yumi growled. Just one kill partner. Pretty please. Naruto's only response was a kindly smile. You'll find I'm not as uptight as the rest. Hiro-san. No kidding. Sununade muttered, a touch of her old bitterness seeping through the smile she wore. A grimace once more reminded of the arrogance of Makoto's clan, his clan. It was going to be an uphill battle undoing the damage they had done to their own reputation. Naruto only hoped he was equal to the task that had been set before him. He felt himself up to it. But only time would tell. It would be here. He decided that he would make the world realize not all had a stick up there. Still, he smiled. And if Hiro scoffed back, for the rest wore smiles that looked as though they had been painted on, their eyes hard with the hardship they had suffered in the last month. Many of them looked outright leery of the newcomers. Not that he blamed them in the least for their caution. The way into the village was through a passage that cut between some very tall, very crooked cliffs, and at the entrance of this passage, a small gate opened to admit their passage. A pair of Anbu passed to allow them their admittance, but their stiff posture belied their tension. He no doubt they wore smiles like they had two electrodes attached to their cheeks beneath those faces. But while their masked leers may have passed over Jiraiya and the others, it was Naruto they fixed their sights on. They were ushered inside. To their infinite surprise, they were each assigned an individual guide. One by one, Orochimaru, Jiraiya, and finally Sununade were led aside until only Naruto remained. Ah, nice to meet you. His gaze fell upon Hiro, half expecting the boy to lead him onward. When he did not, Naruto frowned. Still, in the spirit of friendship and cooperation, not matter how much he might dislike this little underscore, he extended a hand to the younger boy. Hiro regarded his palm as though it were a poisonous adder. For the first time, an actual emotion crossed his visage. Not anger, but rage, a hatred so vile, Naruto nearly recoiled from it. Now, he didn't claim to know what the kid's issues were. But he'd have to work to curb that temper of his, else he'd make more enemies than friends in his short lifetime. As if the future Kage would deign to escort you, he stormed past without another word, leaving Naruto under the watchful gaze of the Anbu. Uchiha-san. He turned, seeking the voice. Yes, one of the masked shinobi suddenly pulled off her facade, drawing aside the likeness of a scorpion to expose her visage to him. Then she reached down and began to remove her uniform. In the same instance, Naruto's heart nearly skipped a beat. Oi, I like where this is going. Oh, he promptly found himself caught in the gaze of a green-haired kunoichi with sunset-colored bangs, her heart-shaped face framed by a slight smile above which eyes of the brightest hazel shone. Her attire was all but functional, not practical in combat, giving him the sense that she dressed this way simply to gain attention. Or someone had ordered her to, he suspected. She sauntered up to him with an almost deceptive ease. Those full hips swaying with each step. There was a sureness to her movements. He realized a grace most kunoichi, even Makoto herself, lacked. She was upon him almost before he knew what was happening, not bothering to ask permission for the intrusion of his personal space. Greetings, she replied stoically, her head inclining in the slightest of bows. My name is Pakura. I am to be your guide for the duration of your stay, Uchiha-san. Jiraiya looked as though he were about to protest. Why did Naruto get the hot kunoichi guide, but a withering look on Sad's part silenced the self-proclaimed pervert. An ordinary Uchiha would have rebuffed her formalities with a casual HN. But then again, Naruto wasn't your typical Uchiha now, was he? To the disbelief of nearly everyone present, he did the one thing that no one expected him to do. He reached out and took Pakura's hand to his own, lightly pressing his lips against the back of her palm. Kissing it, there was a shocked silence amidst both parties. Such a thing was unheard of. Behind him, Sunyunade's visage colored in surprise. She didn't think the Uchiha had a romantic bone in his body. Just call me Nar, he replied, dark eyes meeting her own. As allies, we needn't stand on formality. Her full lips curled in the smallest of smiles. I shall remember that, Naruto-san. She turned then, regarding the Dumbruk Sannin, with something eerily akin to amusement. Your escorts shall direct you to your rooms, honorable shinobi, she said, turning away from them immediately thereafter, as though the trio were but a mere afterthought in her mind. In the meantime, Naruto Dono, I would be more than happy to bring you too. Wait, protested, shouldering her way to the front of the group once more. Where are you taking him? Why to sign the treaty? Of course, Pakura said as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Our Lord's sole stipulation was that he meet with Naruto Dono as soon as he arrived so that they might discuss the terms of our agreement in greater detail. Surely your Hokage informed you of this. Naruto felt the hackles on the back of his neck begin to rise with those words. The old man hadn't mentioned anything like that in the brief. Something wasn't right here. Were they planning to get him alone and kill him? Expression was telling. Evidently, she shared the same thought. In that case, we'll come with you. Jiraiya was quick to interject, trying to preserve the suddenly fragile peace between the two shinobi. We'd be more than happy to meet him. I'm afraid I cannot allow that. The kunoichi returned with a shake of the head. He wished to meet with the Uchiha alone. Why? Came the demand. There are sensitive matters he wished to discuss. Nothing more. Surely you aren't reneging on our alliance over so simple a term. Now see here you little. It's fine. Nar interjected. Draw an alarmed looks from everyone. It's fine. He repeated softly now. If the Sandame wants to speak with me alone, then that's what he'll get. He didn't mention that this felt a great deal like a trap that his every sense screamed at him to get the hell out of here. But he was used to danger. Becoming a political hostage, however briefly, didn't ruffle him in the slightest. His body might want to be far, far away from here, but his mind knew that this charade was entirely necessary. So glad someone sees reason, Packard. Pleased, shall we go? Then we shall. Naruto deferred to her with a wave of the hand. Please lead the way. In the instant as his head turned, Naruto activated the Mangekyo Sharingan and locked eyes with Sunyunade. He could have done so with anyone, but since she was still relatively close, she would have to do. The blonde, of course, startled as he pierced her mind, alarmed to suddenly find herself trapped in the world of Tsukuyomi. There was no torment or torture to greet her here. However, only a singed sentence awaited her arrival in the warping world of Genjutsu, spoken so swiftly she almost wasn't able to read them. If I don't return in 3 hours, take the others and get the hell out of here. Just like that, she was back in the world again, her body slicked with a cold sweat. Naruto's words stood out in quiet confidence as he turned his head back around, the Manekio fading from his orbs. That idiot, he was going to get himself killed. She was certain of it. And all out of some misbegotten sense to keep the peace. Nah. Before Sununade could protest further, she found the Uchiha body flickered away in a swirl of sand. If there was one thing Naruto would take away from his stay in Sungaker besides her stoic beauty, it was the sand. The damn stuff was absolutely everywhere in his face, his hair. Damn it, he'd forgotten to cut that bristling beneath his sandals and stinging at his skin and getting Saint Cuck in his clothes. If it weren't for the veil he'd been given, it surely would have found its way into his eyes as well. That would have stung the newly awakened orbs. Something fierce, he was certain. But ultimately, his thoughts were not with the sand kicked up by the wind of the storm, but rather with his comrades. Had they gotten his message, would they even listen to it? No need to be nervous. Hakura reassured him as she ushered him inside a grand building that had to be the man's residence. I am told Lord K's cage merely wishes to speak with you. Nothing more. Why does that not make me feel any better? Well, for once, we agree. There was an awkward silence between the two halves of his psyche. I won't say anything if you don't. Agreed. A lone seat was waiting for them when they arrived, and in it, a man in the unmistakable white-blue robes of a cage. K's cage-sama Paku reflected, but did not otherwise move from her place at Naruto's side. The Uchiha is here as per your request. Face consumed by the shadows of his wide-brimmed hat, the K's cage acknowledged his presence by raising one elegant hand, never once turning in their direction. He was not so much an honored guest, perhaps as a mild irritance to be endured. But at least the Cease cage didn't glare at him like the Ambu had. If anything, the man seemed to be measuring him, gauging him for any sign of weakness. Abruptly, he laughed aloud. It was a deep, throaty sound that instantly set Naruto on edge. We meet at last. His voice was low yet pleasant, exuding strength and charisma from every pore. I've heard a great deal about you, Uchiha Naruto. The latter bowed. You do me honor, K's cage-sama. Please, what are formalities amongst equals? The man tilted his head, exposing sandaled eyes set within a scarred yet still youthful face. He might have even been handsome once. You may address me by my given name. By all means, please call me Kazayama. Very well, Kazama-san. The man's brow tightened slightly at the mentioned ter suffix, only to soften seconds later. I understand we have you to thank for eliminating the scouts on our border. There was a rather baffling man amongst them. Gari of the explosive release, I believe. We dispatched an enemy platoon led by him. Yes, thank you. Nar had never been particularly good at verbal sparring. He much rather preferred to let his fists do the talking. But that simply wasn't an option here. If he slugged a cage for asking odd questions, he was likely to remove Konoha's only ally in this war. On the contrary, it is I who should be thanking you. A tiny smile broke out on the man's chiseled face like a crack etching along a stone surface. Thanks to your noble efforts, we will be able to duplicate the explosive release for ourselves someday. Together, we will dash our enemies against the borders. Nar felt a cold chill creep over him. The idea of that bloodline in anyone's hands was a frightful thing. Had been lucky thanks to her seal. Other shinobi wouldn't be. But enough about this tedious war. The manly withdrew a bottle and pair of glasses from the folds of his robe, filling both to the brim. Let us drink to our alliance. Nar arched an eyebrow in shock. The man liked his drink. We haven't even discussed the treaty yet. He frowned, accepting one for the sake of saving face. Straight to the formalities. Kazayama smiled mildly. I was hoping to save the most bitter course for last. He let the words hang over them as he drank first, doubtless to convince the Uchiha that he hadn't called him here just to poison him. Nar sniffed subtly, his enhanced senses detecting no trace of poison. He'd heard the unspoken threat in those words. We will discuss it when I am ready. Not before. Like so many others, the K's cage wanted to know if he truly was a descendant of Uchiha Madara, not some impious impostor rising to claim such a prestigious title. I suppose we could. Reluctantly, he drank, wincing as the sake burned down his throat. If the man really had tried to poison him, then he'd be in for an unpleasant surprise. Sakura had taught him how to burn away all but the most potent of toxins with chakra. And with Naruto's reserves, bolstered still by the flagging remnants of Kurama chakra, even the most deadly of venom couldn't inspire more than a mild headache in him. The secret was best served, after all, if it remained a secret. Excellent. Unaware of the musings of his host, the cage poured himself another glass. I trust your stay in my village has been a hospitable one, he asked. Thus far, yes, considering he'd met an impetuous little punk and already been dragged here against his will. Damn. But the man read his expression like a book. I see you've met Hiro. Then you'll have to forgive his behavior. The council has been grooming him to succeed me for some time now. A touch of arrogance is to be expected among the young, don't you think? He laughed softly at the thought. Between the two of us, I'd rather someone more capable claim my seat. Someone like Sasori, for example, if he noticed a muscle jump in Naruto's jaw, he did not acknowledge it. Did you? He's produced many of our finest poisons. The Cease Cage continued. A master puppeteer and at such a young age, truly a prodigy, humble, too. Nothing like Hyoko. Shinobi ought to know their place in the hierarchy. Wouldn't you agree? Hiro has yet to learn that. I wouldn't mind at all if Sasori were to take his place beside me. What are you saying? I'm not saying anything, Uchiha. Just that accidents are quite common in our line of work. Naruto didn't rise to the bait. He'd just been given permission to take a life for political gain. Despite that, it was suddenly all he could do, not to use the sharing to plumb the man's mind for information. Sasori was here in this village. Someone like that could never be Kei's cage. He shuddered at the thought. Kazuyama was quick. Do you like your new weapon? It has been useful, Nar admitted, glancing down at the black tanto he'd been gifted. The very act felt like a betrayal of himself. I am told it was made by a master blacksmith from your village. Indeed, the Cease Cage replied Silky. What you have there is chakra reactive ore. The blade will expand or contract as you see fit. Naruto's surprise must have been evident because the cage laughed again. What did you think we would give such a paltry weapon to someone of your caliber? I would thank you not to test it in my presence, though. My guards are a bit twitchy thanks to the war. Well, then that would explain the chakra he'd been sensing for the last 5 minutes. What do you think of our kunoichi, Nar? Another question, but this one evoked a frown. I have only met one, Pakura. Then his cold gaze fell upon the kunoichi in question. What do you think of her? Nar turned to consider his answer a moment, then supplied the only answer he could. The truth, she seems an exceptional shinobi Kage-sama. Isn't she though? Kajama nodded. Her bloodline is unmatched in our village. I dare say she'd be more than a match for you in close combat. Lord. Pakura's cheeks colored in surprise, the admission having caught her off guard. You honor me with your words. How about it then, Uchiha? Is she not beautiful? Now it was Naruto's turn to color. He was no virgin by any account, but being placed on the spot in such a matter would be enough to ruffle even a cage's feathers. She is very beautiful. You may have her then beside him. Haku returned absolutely ashen. Nar swallowed hard. He'd been expecting a request for a spar or something, not an offering to bed the woman. All right, relax, he told himself. You can talk your way out of this. Just stay calm and don't let him get to you. There was a silence as he contemplated his next move. Then I beg your pardon. I said you may take her back to Konoha with you as your wife. The wind shadow continued amicably, no doubt sensing the sudden shift in mood. Consider her my gift to you. As a matter of fact, I'm in a good mood today, so I will lend you another. You may bring her and any other chunin you wish to Konoha upon your return. Take them with my blessings, and when you become the next Hokage, remember the generosity of Suna and her leaders. This man was making one hell of an assumption there. Nar didn't know what to make of it. Did he assume he was like most Uchiha, constantly lusting for greater powers, that he was going to forcibly wrest the mantle of Hokage from Satobi's shoulders? And in return, the man looked offended. I ask for nothing in return, only that you remember my kindness this day. In return for that, I shall promise you this. We will aid and abet you in every possible way. In this way, no matter the cost nor the loss of life, we will fight by Konoha's side until the last man, woman, and child. Is that the answer you desire? Here is the treaty. You may read it to your liking. Nar did just that, his sharing and flaring to ready every word and subtext, anything that might be slanted to Suna's advantage. Nar bristled as he read over the documents. There had to be more at work here. There just had to be. Every item here benefited Konoha in every possible way. The only thing Suna truly stood to gain was protection and assistance should they fall under attack by enemy forces. And all he had to do was accept 2 of their kunoichi into the fold. And if Pakura wishes to stay at his elbow, the kunoichi flinched as though she'd been struck. She has no choice in the matter. The cage's cage dismissed the woman with a wave of his hand. I have spoken. She will go with you for the good of Suna because I have ordered it. Now I ask only that you sign on the dotted line. Pakura didn't move, but her eyes suddenly sought his. He had an idea of what was going through her head. She was in shock at being offered up like cattle by her cage to appease Konoha. She'd laid her trust with this man. And how had he repaid her? By tossing her aside. There was so much anger in those orbs, though whether it was directed at him or the cage, he knew not. Only that he had to make a decision. Now, here and now, before the cage lost his patience out of curiosity, what would happen if I refuse these terms? Then I'm afraid our alliance is null and void. Kazuyama's tone brooked no further argument. Nar hissed in a sharp intake of breath. In that case, he began. The words were acid in his throat. Ik-sama. Nar was almost grateful when the door slammed open, cutting off whatever he might have said. And ate all but flung himself into the room. The spectacled face so fraught with terror that K's cage didn't even deign to strike him down on the spot. Hiro-sama has been kidnapped in the town square. Ah, damn it, Naruto muttered. Why is this never easy? Hakura was already gone, darting out a window before anyone could say she wasn't needed. By all means, chase after her. The cage urged, but the words were empty, merely a formality. It would be horrible if something were to happen to him. Swearing, Naruto lunged out into the village after her. In the shadows of his hat, a small smile twisted at the cage's face. Hey, are you alright? Hakura resolved herself not to speak as they flitted across the rooftops, not to look at the Uchiha for fear of revealing her emotions. Her tears to display emotion was a weakness, one that could be exploited, just as she had been. If her cage's cage, the man in whom she had laid all her hopes and dreams, was willing to ransom her off to Konoha for the sake of peace, whom could she trust? The Uchiha, he seemed a nice enough fellow, or at least one hesitant about claiming her body like surprise cut of meat. Hey, Hakura cried out in surprise as he moved to block her with his body, forcibly arresting her movement by grabbing her wrist. This close, she was suddenly aware of just how tall he was head and shoulders above her. Not just in terms of height, but skill as well. He wasn't ruffled in the slightest. And yet here she was, nearly a sobbing wreck at the K's betrayal. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? He'd all but signed her death warrant by giving her to the Uchiha, uprooting her from the life that she'd known all this time, and she'd wanted to kill him for it. If that aide hadn't come barging in when he had, she would have thrown herself at the sandane, deciding to die at the edge of his iron sand rather than become someone's trophy. I said, are you alright? Alright, she whispered brokenly into his chest. How can I be alright? She felt like an idiot, ready to weep into the chest of a stranger she barely knew. Forced to be a wife to a man she'd just met. He had struck her interest true, but that had been when she'd thought she had a choice, not this arranged marriage for the sake of her village. Even knowing that many before her had done the same wasn't enough to mend her heart as it were, she could only flounder in disbelief at what had been wrested away from her. You can cry if you want. I will not. She struggled out of his grasp. Surprisingly, he let her go. I am a kunoichi. Almost immediately, she withdrew, rubbing at her wrist. I would never shed such tears. Oi, you were just sold out by your leader. It's all right to be a bit upset. I am not upset. She all but shrieked. That was a lie and Pakura knew it. She was distraught. You don't know me. No, but I'd like to me. You mean? She remarked bitterly. Something in his eyes hardened then. No, I mean I'd like to get to know an admirable kunoichi who deserves better than that scum of a cage. Mere words. She snapped back, but her voice warbled on the last note. Empty of promise, I could always kill him. Onyx snapped into scarlet in dire warning. No one would know. No one but her. Though he had hurt her, she was still a kunoichi through and through. She would do as she was told. But that didn't mean she had to reveal Naruto's threat just now, did it? You really do deserve better than him. Insufferable man. He just wouldn't let it drop, would he? And how would you know? I've seen his type before. In that instant, he seemed to age before her eyes. Not in the physical sense, but more in the spiritual sense. It was all in his eyes. They looked so tired, like he had lived for far too long, and a part of him had given up and was just waiting to die. It was enough to shock whatever weariness she'd had for him right off of Pakura. This man had lived through countless horrors in his life, and yet he was still trying despite her best efforts to wrest her out of this impossible situation. You really have, haven't you? More than you know. Pakura looked at him then, the movement causing her intricate sunset and jade-colored bangs to form the hint of a shroud around her face. His sharing seemed to blur in the morning's light. Nar couldn't miss it, and his expression reflected his intrigue. Pakura tilted her head to the right, then swayed it back left, and Naruto blinked in amazement. In the woman's movement, his own eyes seemed to dance, and with Nato still obviously mesmerized, Hakura leaned forward and quite softly brushed her lips with his own. It took several heartbeats, but that seemed to break the spell, and the Uchiha leaned away, staring at her with puzzlement. Why did you do that? He asked in a voice that seemed hard to find. Because I believe you, she whispered. Naruto his head curiously, and when he started to protest, Hakura put a finger over his lips to silence him. Don't be a fool, she said with a small, sad smile. I'm not worth throwing your career away. This is why I hate village politics, Nar muttered, scarlet orbs fading back to black. Always screwing everything up. Come on, we've got a brat to save. Reluctantly, she took off after him, descending into the streets below. What was that just now? What had made her kiss him? She didn't know and likely wouldn't for many more days. No point in puzzling it out now. Not when the future K's cage was in danger. There he is. Nar skidded to a dead halt when he saw the shinobi in the town square. It was obviously one of Gar's men. As if the apocalyptic rage that knotted the man's face wasn't enough, the burns answered all his questions almost immediately. What it did not answer was how in the hell the man had managed to incapacitate Hiro and Asuna Kunoichi by himself, let alone wreath his body in enough explosive tags to blow a mile-deep crater in Sonagar. Insanity didn't even begin to define this man. He glanced furtively every which way. The look in his eye was one of sheer madness. Someone who had nothing left to lose but his own life. But if he lost it, so would many. You, the man raged the moment he laid eyes upon Nar. Keep your eyes away from me, demon, monster, murderer. You killed my captain, scum, filth. Konoha won't live to regret your actions. The prone forms of the hero and the kunoichi offered no resistance. It was up to them to do something. Calm down, Hakura interjected with a calmness she no longer felt. How could she? After what she'd just done. What are your demands? We can talk about this. Talk, he screeched. There's nothing to talk about soon, you or just as bad as them. You murdered us like pigs. Butcher us like cattle. Now I'm going to do the same to you. Clutching Hiro and the girl closer to himself. He cackled madly. Hell, I'll take you all to hell with me. We can all burn together just like he burned me. You're insane. Nar frowned. And you need treatment. Don't touch me. The man flinched aside as Naruto's sharing span into existence. Don't even look at me. I know your tricks. He told me all about them. I won't be deceived. Naruto froze, blood turning to ice in his veins. He, the true Uchiha, the man was raving now, clearly crazed. Or so everyone seemed to think. He restored my body, told me the truth, sent me here to kill you, traitor. And I will, Moa. How the hell is that even possible? That was when Hiro's gold dust smashed into his face with all the force of a sledgehammer. Whatever the Iwan Nina had been about to say ended then, and his mouth was suddenly flooded with so much of the stuff that he may well have choked on it. And given a few more seconds, he just might have. But they didn't have a few seconds. Even as the future Cease cage wrenched himself free, the man released the kill switch, setting dozens upon dozens of tags aflame. Everyone fled or ran in that awful instant, all save the 4 shinobi for whom his wrath was reserved. His temper inflamed beyond all point of salvaging. The man reached down to ignite the rest of the tags strapped to his body. With his mission having failed, he was determined to at least take a few of them with him. For the glory of Iowa and his such KAG, he would purge these scum. Die. There was no time to decide. He could only save one, not both. So he grabbed the girl instead of the boy and dove for cover. In that instant, he was vaguely aware of Hiro's cry of shock, then of Pakura, flinging a fireball into the man's chest with devastating effect. But it was already too late. Nar saw with his sharing what would happen an instant before it occurred and reacted, calling upon a deadly power he dared have touched until this very moment. An azure rib cage formed out of the nothing. Blue bone breaking into the beginnings of a shoulder, then an arm, an elbow. Then came the explosion and orange fury burned the world white. The incomplete Susanoo served its purpose, acting as a buffer between the three of them and the blast. The Uchiha groaned as he dusted Hyamel off, the grit and gravel of Sonagar already etched into his uniform. A suicide bomber. Who the hell did that anymore? Still bemoaning the dirt and dust that had gotten into his immaculate uniform, the former Uzumaki turned to face the girl he'd just rescued from certain death. The same could not be said of her companion. However, without the flying thunder god technique cursed this body of his, he simply wasn't fast enough save both. Whomever Hiro had been or had been destined to be, he was dead now. Dead as dead could possibly be. Well, he muttered to himself, that could have gone off better. Agreed. His collage muttered beside him, brushing herself off with a groan. Her scorch release had been key in diffusing the blast, though she was far too humble to ever admit it. Though I had not expected him to detonate himself in such a spectacular fashion, her hazel eyes quietly regarded the small crater that had once been the market district. It would have been far larger had she not managed to detonate some of those tags purely. The Iwagakure Asus had only managed to take 2 lives instead of dozens. His own and that of a shinobi. Any injuries? He asked. Here I can heal. Hakura started brushing off his hand with a flush. I would rather you attend to the kunoichi beneath you. Uchiha. Whoa. The teenager they'd rescued managed groan, dusting herself off with a pained hiss. Wah. Where's? She took one look at her companion's charred corpse and turned bone white. Oh my god. Hey. Nar patted the girl's face back to him. He knew well enough that if he gave her a chance to stare over long at her comrade's corpse, the poor girl would just break down. Don't look at him. Look at me. Are you alright? Are you injured? What's your name? The trick was to bombard them with so many questions that they didn't have time to think there would be time to grieve later, if there was even the slightest of possibilities that the attacker wasn't acting alone. Her voice was numb, though thankfully not with shock. Kura rank Chunin. Injuries none. Measurements. Ha. Kidding. Kidding. He sighed. If she had enough energy to be angry, then she'd be just fine. Right then, Kurachan. I need you to focus. Can you stand? Hi. Nar froze as he helped her up as he got a good look at her realization swarming over him. Brown hair, purple eyes, merciful kami above and yummy below. This was no mere kunoichi in his arms. He just saved Gar's mother from certain death. And if that boy with the gold dust was who he thought he was, then that blackened body had to be Gar's father. That was who Hiro was. No other shinobi wielded such a technique. And if they did, he didn't know of them. Meaning, balls. What the hell happened here? Naruto didn't even look up as Sununade's voice pierced the air above him. Jiraiya and Orochimaru arrived soon thereafter, pausing only to go at the massive hole the man had punched in the village before bringing their attention to bear upon Nar. In the end, it was the latter, not the former, who asked the million-dollar question. What did you do? Nar took one long look at Pakura, then Kura, and sighed. Yeah, kind of a long story there. And there you have it. Naruto finally starts changing things en masse. No one sees him for what he really is, and more he's losing pieces of himself. He remembers what he once was, but more and more he's starting to see just how much a mess he's walked into. And now he has the Mangekyo uncertain of whether or not it will make him blind. Ain't that lovely? On the plus side, he's attracted attention and unknowingly started to ensnare her heart. We've started and ended the Suna arc in style here, folks. And Naruto's unintentionally picked up 2 girls. Hope you enjoyed it. On another note, Naruto has officially decided to Atrian and convert Orochimaru to the side of good for the sake of Konoha rather than end the bastard. Well, see how that wokers out. Well, get to see interactions and potential arguments between his ladies next chappy. Look forward to it, Yano. God, this is going to be fun to write. So many ideas, but feel free to suggest something. Pairing is still up in the air, but Makoto is most likely going to be involved, although I will gladly take any other recommendations that are offered. Kasha's falling for him, but the question does remain, will Naruto ever reciprocate her feelings? I'm leaning toward yes, in time. I may even include Sununade, seeing as how the age gap has shrunk to almost nothing now. Makoto may have a slight lead, but the pairing is still entirely up in the air. Vote review. Tell me what you want. So, in the immortal words of Atlas, review, would you kindly, and of course, enjoy the preview. Guess what happens? Preview. Aim. Naruto's deadpan was barely concealed. You give me a team, and the first thing you do is send me to aim. I wish it were otherwise, but you have proven yourself too capable. Hai replied, steepling his fingers. Your actions in Suna garnered a great deal of attention. After all, he made no mention of Pakura and Kura. That went without saying that Naruto had made a coup by securing the 2 kunoichi for Konoha, regardless of what some might think. So, what's the mission? A rank is matter of fact. And Nar pressed. Serbi continued, Hanzo's been making trouble along the border for too long now and needs to be dealt with. I've already sent Jirayakan and the others on ahead. If you hurry, you should be able to catch up with them. Besides, these 3 are quite capable, as I'm sure you'll see. I'm sure they'll become Shunin in no time. Naruto's only response was to pinch the brow of his nose. Let me guess. I have no say in this whatsoever. None at all. Now, see for yourself. As if on cue, a soft knock sounded on the door. Ah, there they are now. Come in, Chu. 2s entered, closing the door behind them. I would like you to meet your team. Naruto's brow furrowed as he beheld the 3 you assembled before him by Serbi. He'd fought and railed against this from the moment he'd set foot back in Konoha. But in the end, cooler heads had prevailed. So here he was in the old man's office, silently ruining his new rank as Jonin. He recognized a young Kurane Yui almost immediately. Those ruby red eyes were a dead giveaway. The boy he didn't know. He had silver hair like Kakashi, but there was no way it was his old sensei. Kakashi was still a kid in the academy if he recalled correctly. It wasn't until Serbi identified him as Ibiki Morino that he actually got a rise out of Naruto. Oh, this was rich. These two had scared the crap out of him when he was a kid, but now the tables were turned. Speaking of tables, where was the third student? Surbi seemed to realize it as well. Where is Uzumaki Kusha? He asked. Naruto's head snapped around so quick it might have flown clear off his neck. Somewhere in the back of his mind, his darker half cackled. Gnarly only had one word for them both. No. Yes. Hai answered immediately, ignoring the killing intent that flooded the room. She hasn't had a sensei since her last one died in action a year ago. As she seems quite attached to you, I deemed it fitting. She's too old. A genin is a genin. The Sandaime remained unmoved by his plight. Besides, and here he did become him closer, you're one of the few shinobi who can control her should it attempt to beat the seal again. I trust you will treat this matter with the utmost discretion. Before Naruto could answer, a voice was heard from beyond the door. Those fools weren't arm wrestling. They were playing life-death match. T.T. Bane. Hi, one of the Anbu answered. Go right on in. Instead of opening slowly, the door flung itself open with a resounding crash, admitting a blur of orange and black. Uzumaki Kusha reporting for duty Ganar. She skidded to a grinding halt, eyes wide at the sight of him. When did you get back from your mission? Yo, just a few hours ago. The Uchiha colored at the sight of the girl. Beautiful as ever. Her long lustrous red hair trailing after her loud entrance. Hishi 8 strapped proudly to her forehead. And was she wearing orange? It was almost enough to draw a smile to his face. The sight of his favorite color stirring up fond memories deep within his heart. Still, the scowl refused to depart from his face. Surbi's next words only made it deepen. Meet your new sensei, Kusha. Her grin was practically ear-splitting and bloody adorable, he had to admit. Sensei. In hindsight, their return trip was surprisingly peaceful, considering all Naruto and Ko had gone through. After the chaos ensued the town square, it was quietly decided that it would best serve the interests of both parties if Konoha signed the treaty and departed. Post-haste a tactical retreat to avoid further casualties. The Suna Council had called it. The case cage had been less subtle. Hiro's corpse was still cooling, the ink still drying on the dotted line, and already Sazori had been chosen as the man's give successor. Now that he'd gotten what he wanted, he was all too eager to see the back of them. 2 kunoichi would be given to the leaf as per the terms of the treaty, and in return, the larger village would honor its ties with sand for all time. Kind words were spoken and promises given, but they left Naro feeling soiled inside nonetheless. And how could they not? Orochimaru of all people had been the one to talk him into formally accepting the terms since the Cease Cage refused to honor their peace in any other suit. He was loath to admit it, but the slippery snake had a point. Sometimes you had to put aside what you wanted for the sake of the greater good. Jiraiya, of course, had been all for it. Of course, some things never changed. Oddly morose about it, though. Hakura had been silent as the grave ever since they'd left the gates. In contrast, Kura seemed almost grateful for the Sandaime's decree, despite the fact that the man had none too subtly berated her for even being kidnapped in the first place. She had been called weak, worthless, and not fitting to be a kunoichi. Of course, she was grateful to be gone. Not that Naruto blamed her. Gar's mother struck him as the gentle sort, and her unease in the presence of her own cage spoke volumes for the girl's character. She was a gentle soul, couldn't hurt a fly if she tried. Relatively speaking. Itai. Sorry, Kura whispered contritely as she continued to trim his hair. Did I get you? A little. Yeah. Ow. Careful, girl. G-man, Naruto yelped as the scissors missed his hair and accidentally nipped a chunk out of his ear. His cry was met by muffled snorts of laughter from the others, mounted once more upon the mighty Manda's head. The large snake finged them across the desert twice in less than 2 days, with no sandstorm or shinobi to deter them. Their odd little group was making surprising progress. Nar, finally making the opportunity, had decided to cut his hair. The long locks have been singed during the suicide bombers' last blast. Long locks were useful for shinobi like Jiraiya who hardened their hair into spikes and flailed it around, but Naruto saw it as more of an impediment than anything else. The last thing he wanted was someone grabbing a handful of it again as they had during the ambush. So he was getting a trim quartesti of Kura. He was keeping them bangs in a good portion of it though. Couldn't ditch the resemblance entirely. Perhaps you should let me try. Naruto-sama Pakura asked, the ghost of a smile flitting across her face. Granted, it was a pale imitation of the real thing, but nevertheless her very first display of outward emotion since they'd left Suna behind them. She'd clung to him like a second shadow since the explosion, though thankfully she hadn't been untoward in her displays of devotion since their kiss, if it could even be called such. More and more Uchiha Uzumaki, Naruto found himself surrounded by beautiful women with no idea what to do with them. Oh, he knew what he could do, but his chivalry held that urge firmly in check. Somewhat kind of sort of. Oh, who the hell was he kidding? He'd wanted to screw Pakura silly for at least an hour. How? And it didn't help that she kept brushing up against him. Ahaha, maybe that would be for the best. Very well. But when the older Kunoichi tried to claim the scissors, Kura clutched them to her chest. Was I really that bad? One look from the poor Chunin made Naruto think he just killed her puppy or something. Gee. Not the puppy eyes. No jutsu, the bane of man's existence everywhere. Did all women know that technique? Not even he could last more than 5 seconds under that stare. Perhazy was simply too chivalrous because he folded like wet tissue paper. Quote. Let her do it. Nar almost groaned, pitying the way his poor head was going to look after this. Kura's smile made up for that if only a fraction. Gods, what was he going to go with her? Tsunade shook her head to that effect, completely unaware of the conflict rowing within the young man's skull. You big baby, you can fling fireballs until you're out of breath. But when she tries to cut your hair, not my fault. Alright. I never liked getting my hair cut. Besides, I'm ticklish. Not a lie. His neck had always been very sensitive. Sakura had enjoyed tormenting him there during their brief relationship. Ouch. There it was again. That dull ache reminding him of the one woman he'd failed to save. The only woman he might have moved on in this day and age, but a part of her would always be with him. A hand on his shoulder, urging his feet onward, reminding him why he was doing this. Never again, he would tell himself whenever he saw someone in need, be they kunoichi or shinobi, someone whose life he would save from the misfortune that had befallen them in this time. Never ever again. He knew he couldn't save everyone, but he'd be damned if he didn't try to save someone. So that's why he's never cut it. Orochimaru mused. Kid Jiraiya grumbled at that one. I don't whether to be jealous or just pity you. Leave him be, Jiraiya. The paler of the pair was quick to admonish his comrade for the slip. I for one see the advantage of having 2 foreign kunoichi under our roof. It will strengthen ties with the village. Naruto would have shook his head in amazement had he not been writhing in discomfort. Orochimaru backing him up. Was the world coming to an end? Still though, that was one way to think of it. If said kunoichi hadn't already fallen head over heels for him. A tick mark appeared over the blonde's forehead. Ticklish. Oh. Kura-chan. She began sweetly. Naruto froze instantly on guard whenever she used that tone of voice. Hi, can I borrow those for a second? The Uchiha bristled the moment she handed them over, sharing and flaring. Oi, don't you dare. Wah. Afraid off a little snip. Tsunade edged closer, clearly enjoying his discomfort. Naruto's gaze snapped to Pakura and Kura, seeking aid. But the 2 kunoichi were smiling, silently biased that their savior was so terrified by the prospect of the scissor-wielding woman. Jiraiya and Orochimaru weren't of any help either. Both men seemed content to observe his mad scramble to safety, skittering backward like a drunken crab in a desperate attempt to escape the blonde. I'm warning you. See now. I'm not going to hurt you much. Let me go, woman. Enjoy the haircut, Gaki. Jiraiya snickered. Naruto yelled as Tsunade tightened her hold of him and mercilessly descended with the scissors. No. One haphazard haircut later. Are you still sulking about that ... Come on, kid. Are you really going to give me the silent treatment? Leave him be, Jiraiya muttered quietly, poking at the fire with a stick. Hell open up when he's good and ready. Unfortunately, Tsunade seemed to think good and ready meant good and now, because she refused to let the matter drop. If there was one thing she loathed above all else, it was being ignored. And the Uchiha was doing just that, stubbornly resisting all attempts to coax him out of his self-inflicted depression. Not that he could be blamed, of course, after the horrendous haircut she'd given him. Come on, damn it, talk to me. Let me be. Naruto's voice resounded in kind, spoken as though from a great distance. Ya hacked a huge chunk out of it. Crazy woman, what was that? You did mess up his hair pretty badly, Orochimaru pointed out. Dully, but I'm never giving you scissors again. Kura shook her head in mock disbelief. To think someone could be so poor at cutting hair. That's not should have let me do it, added Pakura. Poor Sade. She recoiled as though she'd been stung. Why are you ganging up on me? Nar folded both arms across his chest and refused to answer the laughter that followed that statement. And even if he had DNE to speak, he probably wouldn't have been able to make himself heard over the howling winds. Anyways, a storm had swept up out nowhere from the wastes, battering them with great gales and even greater gouts of sands. With night fast approaching and temperatures plummeting, their little group had been forced to seek shelter in the first. It would have been slow going indeed if they hadn't found this cave. Hakura had been the one to point it out. The Jonin skill the sole reason they weren't out in the cold at this very moment. It was also the reason why Naruto had gone to the back of said cave to be alone. He wasn't at all fond of what Sade had done to his hair. He'd get over it eventually, but for now he wanted nothing to do with scissors or Sununade. He wanted to sulk and not even Kura could jostle him out of it. He'd walked as far as his legs would carry him. And here he sat until her voice finally stopped pestering him. Grungle. The former blonde blanched as his gut grumbled in protest. It wanted food. Damn it. Even then, he willed himself not to move, waiting until he was certain the others had fallen asleep. His stomach growled again at this, rumbling in angry betrayal. He couldn't very well last the night without some sort of sustenance, now could he? With that in mind, he started to rise, intent on filing. That was when his foot caught on something, sending him stumbling into a wall. Ouch. What in the world? Frowning, he bent to inspect it. Black eyes bulged. CCC corpse. For it was indeed just that, a mummified man. His skin stretched taut over dead bones, eyes long withered and gone, his face frozen in his last moments. Whatever had killed him, it must have been agonizing to produce an expression like that. But what was this? Just leave the bee and get some food. His darker half grumbled. I'm starving here, man. But Naruto was intrigued. The dead man bore a Hishiot of Kumogic, his emaciated body, suggesting he'd been here a good long while. A few decades at least, if this withered husk was any indication, more or less of a precaution. He chose to frisk the man, see if he had any supplies on him. One had to be practical during war. After all, he'd been expecting kunai shuriken-year-old supplies gone bad. What he got was a large onyx-colored roll of parchment bound to the man's back. Nar studied the scroll for a long moment, quietly marveling at what he had found. It was indeed a large scroll, almost as large as the toad summoning scroll Jiraiya had once shown him. That or some kind of scroll meant to store items. Surely this couldn't be such a thing, could it? No, this looked more like a aha breaking the seal that bound it. His suspicions were confirmed, a summoning contract, but not just any mere contract. This was contract by which he could summon a beast as legendary as it was mythical. Dragons, he felt his fingers tremble at the thought and fought the urge to put it back. He wasn't aware such a pact had existed, and indeed, if it had most likely been lost in this cavern to the ages. No one had stumbled upon an old corpse in this time. No one had thought to search through his belongings. No one knew of this. No one except him. Yummy was practically bouncing with glee inside his head. This is great. No, this is beyond great. Oi, do you have any idea what we could do with this? Well, have the village kissing our feet. Nar said nothing to that idea, instead resolving himself to inspect the scroll more closely. If something is too good to be true, it often is. But despite his reservation and an exhaustive inspection, this scroll was every bit as legitimate as it seemed. Detailed within this worn parchment were a series of signatures, their names too worn to even partially decipher. This scroll wasn't just old. It was ancient. Whomever this man had been, he must have been of a rare breed. Indeed, the things this man must have seen. Stop doling and sign it. God, you don't have to shout. Nipping a thumb, he carefully wrote his name in blood. Uchiha Nar. He had expected the scroll to reject him outright for using a fail name, but it accepted him without complaint. His signature appearing at the end of that long and lengthy list. His thumb healed almost immediately. It seemed such a small wound wasn't beyond the Kyuubi's impaired ability reserved to heal. Despite his own curiosity, however, trying to summon such a beast in this enclosed space was nothing short of foolish. He'd wait until later to attempt such a feat. Closing it, he opened a storage scroll and sealed it away. Wouldn't do to have his friends learn of his new discovery before he'd master it now, would it? Whomever this man was, whomever he had been, he clearly didn't have a use for it anymore. That didn't make him feel any less of a grave robber. Although Kumo and Iwa might be enemies of Konoha in this war, but they'd also been their allies in the last. And here he was picking a corpse apart. So much for nobility. What have you got there? Jesus, mother. Gnarly started out of his skin as Pakura's voice snaked into his ear. She seemed materialized from the gloom like a ghost. One moment she wasn't there and the next she was, cradling a swirling sphere of pale fire in the palm of her hand. Despite himself, the Uchiha actually gulped. Damn thing was downright eerie. Her pale skin seemed to shimmer in the dim light, her hazel eyes dancing with the crimson color of her flames. The silence seemed to stretch unto eternity between the two of them. An awkward tension broken only by the sound of their breathing. Finally, someone broke it. Scorch release. The kunoichi explained at his questioning glare, Ro fully indicating the crimson orb with a jerk of the head. Just call me a glorified human flashlight. She fell silent after that one, pointedly eyeing to the spot beside him in an unspoken inquiry. Can I sit? Her gaze seemed to ask. Reluctantly, Naruto slid back, aquashing to her quiet question. She settled in neatly beside him, her shoulder brushing his for a heartbeat. They remained like that, nuzzling in silence. The others are sound asleep. Nar asked at last. Why aren't you? Hakura snorted. It was a very unladylike sound. Your friend Jiraiya. She arched a delicate eyebrow teasingly. He snores loudly. Ah. Nar remembered that from his training days with Erosin. It was enough to make him snicker. Glad to see you finally came out of your shell. Indeed, her last two remarks had surprised him. She was being a great deal more informal with him. He liked that. Didn't want people treating him like royalty because of his name. More than anything, he wanted to be treated as a regular shinobi, albeit an extraordinarily powerful one. One who now has the legendary dragon contract. Yummy popped into existence on his shoulder. Oh, the havoc we will wreak with that. Nar quietly quashed the little devil and then returned his attention to Pakura. So why the sudden change of heart? I've done some thinking. She shrugged. When my cage told me I was to go with you, I thought of it as a curse at first. You calling me ugly, sweetheart? He quirked an eyebrow. No. Pakura shot to her feet as though she'd been burned. 1,000 pardons, Naruto dono. Relax. I was just joking. He took her wrist and tugged her back down. Lighten up. You're making fun of me. She accused, but she used the orb in her hand to light the torch nonetheless. It burned softly at their feet, providing a touch of warmth and light as her scorching fireball faded. Maybe, but you need to loosen up a little bit. And how do you suggest I do that? She challenged. Well, you might want to let your hair down once in a while and be sociable. Yano. You and Tsunade are getting along swimmingly, but you haven't said so much as 2 words to Jiraiya or Akimaru. One is a pervert, the other frightens me. She returned in a tone that hinted there would be no arguing on that and any attempt to do so on his part would be proved futile. Can you move closer a bit? I'm cold, Naruto complied. Nevertheless, leaning into her until he could feel her even through his jacket. This close, he could smell her. The faint scent of a desert lilac, rare and beautiful, yet so understandably fragile. Without thinking, a hand rose and reached out to touch her hair, fingers stroking through the jaden locks, lingering at their sunset-colored tips. What? Pakura flushed. Is there something on my face? No. Do you like girls with long hair? That question caught him off guard. Long hair, huh? Nar thought on that one a moment, mentally flicking through the girls he knew who possessed such luscious locks. Hinata Karen May. He wasn't really opposed to long or short. In any case, eventually he shrugged. I don't dislike them. Pakura said nothing for the longest time, twirling a strand through her fingers. Suddenly, her gaze slid to his. Would you like it if I grew mine out? I like you for who you are. Naruto frowned, not seeing the point to such a question. Even if you are a bit stiff. Oof. He grunted as she shoved an elbow into his stomach. That hurt. TT Ebeo. So you can feel pain after all. A demure smile pulled at her lips. And here I was beginning to think you were invulnerable unless scissors are involved. She chuckled softly. Nar uttered a series of oaths so foul it made her cheeks burn before culminating in a single sentence. Shinobi don't give good haircuts. Next time, ask me to cut it. Pakura suggested. I'm no expert, but my aunt taught me a few things. Nar bristled, thinking immediately of Tsunade's hack job, but nodded nonetheless. It wasn't as though Pakura could screw it up beyond what had already been done. I'll do that then. At her miserable expression, he swiftly switched gears. So you have family back home, an aunt and an uncle, actually. Yes. The kunoichi warmed to the change of topic immediately, her eyes brightening with a spark of life. They're civilians, though she's been a stylist all her life, and he, an accountant. I know it sounds silly, but they probably think me a hero for giving myself to Konoha as I have. Damn K's cage, Nar muttered beneath his breath, treating his own shinobi like pawns on a chessboard. I should have killed him. I told you not to say such things. She fixed him with an intense stare. Besides, I would rather be. And here she did gulp. Better to you and have my freedom than remain a tool in Suna. You've been wonderful to me so far. Yes, I suppose that's true. Do you have any family though in your village? A sorrowed knot twisted at Naruto's gut. No direct family anyway. So, you were alone before that. I had someone. Oh, her face fell. What's she like? She died a long time ago. Ah, Naruto, I'm sorry. Hakura, Onyx met Hazel. Both turned aside, unsure of what to say. The air between them felt charged, as if they were both waiting for something to happen. Though Nurid was sure it was just a product of his own overactive imagination. He tried to concentrate on small talk, but it felt as if something more than just words were passing between them. And when Pakura's hand suddenly lifted to cradle the juncture of his neck and shoulder, he jumped so badly their conversation came to a grinding halt. Sparks skittering as he realized Pakura was touching him and looking at him with warmth and concern. "You're injured," she murmured softly. Naruto blinked, reminded of the explosion of back in Sanaga. A shard of debris had smacked him in the face, filled with adrenaline. He'd thought nothing of it at the time, but the mere mention of it was enough to evoke a dull ache. One that began to fade as a familiar green glow engulfed Pakura's hand. "You know how to heal." It was not a question. One learns many skills in Suna. Came her even reply. "I'm no medic, but I can ease the pain." Ease the pain. Was she talking about his injury or the burden he'd been bearing ever since Hiro had died? The knowledge that Gar and his siblings no longer existed was a painful burden to bear. He'd never once considered that his presence in the past might obliterate the future of his friends. He couldn't care less what had happened to Sasaki, or the fact that he'd essentially done the same by wiping his former ally from existence the moment he'd taken Makoto. This was different. There was nothing to prevent him and Pakura from "Do want me to ease it?" He had the distinct impression she wasn't talking about the bruise anymore. Anyone with half a brain cell could see the dual meaning of those words. Their eyes met again. This time neither looked away. "Please." Perhaps it was the stress. Maybe it was the unspoken tension between the two of them. It might have even been the physical movement of her hand now cradling his face. Whatever the case, he suddenly found his lips on hers, his hand cupping her cheek and guiding her mouth to his. If his kiss with Makoto had sparked a flame, this one ignited a raging inferno. Pakura melted into the lock of those lips with a soft sigh as though she'd been waiting for him all along. Perhaps she had. He hadn't had enough time to take stock off their kiss back in Suna. There had been so much on his mind, too much danger to even register little more than a touching of their lips. Not this time. They were soft and moist and oh so very warm, pressing against his with a tender insistence he simply couldn't bring himself to deny. It felt freeing, wonderful. All his worries and fears fell away at once, pushed to the back of his mind by the mouth of the sun Kunoichi pressing against him. He hadn't a care in the world. Pakura was of a similar mind. At first, his was so slow and tender that it made her want to melt into a puddle on the cavern floor. Without warning, it became hard and hungry, making her berry toes curl and her clothes threatened to fall off altogether. His hand split through her tightly bound hair and gently pulled the needle free, loosing the verdant green tresses messily from captivity as the other tightened on the underside of her thigh, tugging her leg up a fraction to cradle his hips. She moved with him, straddling her weight against his, knocking him to the floor, her lips never leaving his for an instant. He shifted against her, hissing in pain as his back struck the unyielding stone. "Pakura," he rasped against her mouth. His voice alone was enough to evoke a soft, cracked moan in the back of her throat. She wanted him, needed him. Here was a man who didn't see her as a tool or a pawn. A piece on a chessboard to be moved forward or back or sacrificed when the need saw fit. He saw her as Kunoichi. As a woman, she heard in the way he called her name, felt it as he stroked the back of her neck, saw it in those burning black orbs, tasted it as her tongue tangled with his. It was everywhere around them, saturating the air, or perhaps that was her bloodline warming the cold stone on their backs. There was no plea to stop as his hand traced her cheek, then her neck. No demand or anger there in those words. Unbidden, she felt a spool of warmth trickle between her legs. Oh God, he was making her wet. His hand continued on its direct path down to her sternum, where it met resistance from the zipper of her dark flak vest. He began to push it down, unintentionally, sending tiny needles of desires prickling at her body in swift succession. Tiny gasps fled from her mouth. Don't stop. Don't stop. Pakura was in utter bliss. Her were tight and aching, demanding to be touched. Her skin felt as though the flames of her scorch release danced beneath it, virtually beyond her control, writhing and arching encouragement to the finger pushing her zipper down. She could barely control herself. It took every fiber of her being not to just tear the damn thing off and take him now. Every second he delayed was torment. Every instant in which his lips were not upon hers agony. Clearly, this was less than normal. Nar seemed to realize this the moment he'd pushed the zipper far enough to expose the valley between her. He paused, considering for an awful instant she feared he was going to back away. Pakura was left on the ground, panting from residual want and an unfulfilled aching. In a way, she was relieved that he'd stopped, but the damage had already been done. If he backed off now, her heart would be in pieces. She'd only just begun to trust him. And if he were to betray that trust now, oh, the swift tug of his wrist savagely disabused her of such a notion. Ever so slowly he pulled his hand the rest of the way down, gently tugging it free with a flick of a wrist. His hand took up residence upon one as though he owned the damn thing, kneading the flesh softly beneath his fingers. He chose that moment to take her between his teeth and nip. Not gently, as fate would have it, the fraying leash Pakura had kept on her self-control chose that moment to snap. Stop teasing me. Go damn it. Not content with their new position, she grabbed him by his flak jacket and pulled him towards the floor, his hands tugging at her clothes as they went. Naruto muttered some earth jutsu beneath his breaths as they fell, simultaneously raising a wall of hardened rock to keep any unwanted eyes at bay and softening the cavern floor into a lamy bed of soil in the same instant. She saw his eyes in the dim torch light, sharing dancing as she tore at his clothing, and he hers. His hands were equally as explorative as they struggled to eradicate all barriers between them. He pulled the remnants of her jacket blouse over her head and pushed her gently onto the bed, admiring the look of her torso in the dim light afforded by their torch. He took off his own shirt, smirking softly as her eyes danced over his chest. He leaned down and pulled her pants away, revealing a pair of briefs. He chuckled softly as he saw them, their dampness. Wow, I thought you'd be wearing a thong. Horrible, she whispered, not meaning a word of it. Yeah. Her words ended in a sharp gasp as he bent to remove them with his teeth. Sharp incisors defiantly plucking her last article of clothing and tossing aside. Pakura had just enough time to wonder at that mischievous glint in his eyes before he lowered his mouth past her waist down to the thatch of dark curls just above her. Nar, she realized too late what he was about to do, and she was powerless to prevent it. She'd never had that done to her before. The sudden lash of pleasure was utterly unbearable, and her body snapped rigid with tension, unable to decide whether to push closer or pull away. Helpless little mules escaped her mouth, and her hands tugged at his hair so hard it was a wonder he didn't complain. Razor blades of pleasure tore at her heart and cut her to pieces before she could bother to protest. Pakura knew not how long his tongue stabbed and swirled at that sensitive bundle of nerves, only that when he finally ceased his ministrations, she could barely bring herself to move. That's not fair, she gasped out. Those dark eyes surveyed her with thinly veiled amusement. You're still wearing clothes. Not fair. Well, why didn't you just say so? Nar did just that, tossing his belt and trousers aside. The two shinobi were soon in Pakura straddling him, taking him in her hands as she slowly lowered herself into her lover. Pakura was by no means a virgin, but even she'd hesitated a moment before taking him in. And when she did, she wasn't disappointed. His length stretching her muscles just shy of their breaking point. A few quick thrusts began to push her closer and closer to that edge. Then further, further until that was all it took for the haze to fall over Pakura. And she came with a small cry collapsing against him. There was a silence bed when the two shinobi then broken only by their short gaps of breath. Finally, Pakura turned her head to look up at Naruto, disheveled hair tickling at the nape of his neck. She laid a soft kiss upon his chin and snuggled down against him, completely content, whole, satisfied, relieved. It was as if she'd been missing a piece of herself and had finally found in him here within this mysterious Uchiha. That was wow. Nar finished with a gasp, cradling her against him. With Makoto had been amazing, but Pakura was a very close second. There had been a graceful savagery to their love-making. Not slow and drawn out, but frantic as though the two of them couldn't bear to do without the other. You really should let me cut your hair, she murmured, brushing a hand through the ebony locks. Even after what Sade-sama did, it just keeps growing. Wah, you bang me once and think that gives you the right to start snipping. Naruto laughed, the words completely without rancor. I'd like that actually, but not too short. All right. Pakura's only reply was to nuzzle up against him. Whatever you say, husband. Naruto was suddenly intensely grateful that her eyes were closed because Pakura missed the flaming flush that stole over her face. Granted, the idea of being betrothed to her didn't seem so far-fetched now, but being called husband by such a drop-dead gorgeous woman. Well, he'd never expected such a thing. You do know we aren't married yet, right? She simply purred like a contented kitten. Somehow the sound endeared her to him even more. As long as you will I am yours. Neither would speak of what happened on that stormy night. Although some would wonder why were the two cuddled together the next morning. It was something of a small blessing when they finally reached the gates with most of Naruto's hair and his mind still intact. His neck felt far less strained now, the spiky ebony curtain of his hair now merely shoulder length instead of the jagged curtain that had covered his back for most of the journey. It felt good to be able to turn his head and not get sideswiped by his own hair. Pakura really had done a wonderful job on it. Now he did not so much resemble the madman from whom he was supposed to descend as he did look similar. Still, even with the haircut, sometimes he half expected to find Ma's face staring back at him for all intensive purposes, it nearly was with only a few minor differences. Tisking softly to himself, he turned his gaze from the evening heavens back to the earth. Wouldn't do to go around smacking into trees now, would it? Now that they'd disembarked from Manda, and with the village only a stone's throw away, he almost found himself longing for the easy ride the King of Serpents had offered. Changing the future was hard work, damn it. But the prizes, man, think of the prizes. One more crack out of you, and I'm putting ya on mute. Oh, I won't mind being quiet, considering you're about to get some. That's it, come here. Yummy retreated, slithering away with a snicker before he could pin him down. His darker half was utterly incorrigible, uncaring of the bonds of morality that had once bound them. And that was troublesome. Naruto-sama. He turned his head as carried up beside him, her violet eyes peering through the gloom to meet his with an eerie certainty. He remembered her remark that she was a censor type, but the way she looked at him told the Uchiha she'd known exactly what he was up to, lagging behind at the tail end of the group. Even Pakura was ahead of them, reluctantly making small talk with Jiraiya at the latter's behest. That was good for her. She needed to learn that the Konohashi weren't her enemy. Not by any stretch. She needed to learn that this wasn't a death sentence, that there were others upon which she could rely besides him. Pakura might be special to him now, but she needed to learn to interact with others. Kura, on the other hand, seemed more curious than afraid of her new home, judging by the inquisitive look in his eyes. You need something. She faltered for a moment before pinning him with a stare so intense he almost started. Yes. What's Konoha like? It was exactly what he needed. Why? I'm glad you asked. For all the bad memories he'd had here, there were even more good ones. Now, some might tell Yukon Konoha has a great village rich with history, but the truth is with that he launched into a grand tale of the village both past and present, parts of which were exaggerated, of course, for the sake of the story, telling her of all the sights and sounds, the best places to train, greatest Iris, Ikyaku, still stood at the top of that list quite proudly, gladly answering the occasional question offered, giving his own unbiased opinion of several clans, some of which would have started a war had they heard his words. The story finally culminating just as they reached the centuries at the gate. And that's why you never piss off an Harem. By the end, Kura was positively glowing with amusement. Her frown was nowhere to be seen. If anything, she seemed to have forgotten it entirely in her urge not to laugh. Needless to say, Nar noticed. What's so funny? It's nothing. The Chunin shook her head, the motion sending her short dresses twirling as they ground to a halt outside the village and awaited admittance. I just never imagined the Uchiha were like this. Powerful and arrogant, yes, but kind too, like you. You've actually made me feel a little bit better about leaving my home. Nar felt something twist inside of him. Did you leave any family back home? If you mean parents, no. They died a long time ago. I've been living on my own ever since. Had a distant cousin, but we never really talked. I'll admit, I was kind of interested in Hyoken, but after what happened, her expression tightened only ever so slightly. I don't think my love life is about to take off anytime soon. Sorry. Damn. She'd reminded him again. Tamari, conquer, Gar. By letting Hiro die, he'd effectively killed the Sunba siblings before they were born. Yet another trio to tack onto the ever-growing list of dead. Worse, he almost couldn't bring himself to care. What did that make him? A monster for changing things or a villain for simply shrugging off the loos of life? Would it be worth it in the end? Would he change their past only to sacrifice his own future, his very soul in the process? Not even the Shinigami himself knew the answer to that. No, don't be. He turned, frowning as Kura spoke up again. I'm glad you saved me and everything. It's just this. She gestured to the gates. It's all so sudden and unexpected. I feel like I'm going to wake up at any moment and find out that I've been dreaming. Good or bad dream? Good. I think she looked at him for a long moment. Then smiled. Definitely good. For what it's worth, I didn't mean to take you out of your village like that. I'm actually glad you did. What? Her admittance rocked him to the core. She was grateful. Who was grateful to leave behind everything they'd ever known? I had no friends in Suna. Frankly, it was a miracle I made Chunin. My only skill is a talent I was born with. She touched a hand to the small gourd she kept bound at her waist. The ability to manipulate sand for what it was worth. I'm not even sure if it's a bloodline. She swirled her hand for emphasis, UNCCORING the tiny container and calling forth the grains. Naruto watched, Uruk as they swirled around her fingers, obeying all her whims and actions. Your cage is a kind man, right? Kura's voice fell, reduced to little more than a dry whisper. Perhaps hell finds some use for me once they let us in. Naruto felt something stir in him at the sight of that sand. Her words reminded him much of Gar before he'd become K's cage. It hurt. Without thinking, he rounded on her. Don't talk like that. His own actions, the snappishness of his tone startled the both of them, his hand locking round her wrist in a vice, causing the sand to fall away from her fingers. You are not a tool. His words got a backwards glance from Pakura and a small sigh from Sununade. You are a kunoichi and a splendid one at that. You are a person. You have meaning, purpose. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. See, that's what I mean. Despite the painful grasp, Kura made no effort to shake herself free. If anything, she seemed to value the contact. You treat me like I have value worth. The others, your clan, are they like you? One hand traced her small fingers drawing soft circles in his rough hand. Because if they are, oh no, he answered, mesmerized by the motion. I'm a special case, so you're just my knight in shining armor. That got a shy smile out of her. Thank you, Naruto-san. I appreciate the sentiment. Well, you're welcome, Naruto answered, releasing her hand, suddenly unsure. What the hell was that? For a moment there, he had almost, oh, that's right. His head swung around as Kura piped up once more. I wanted to give this to you. She dipped a hand into a pouch at her side and emerged with an alabaster-colored scroll, one she pushed into his waiting hands. Nar accepted it, frowning. A scroll. Not just any scroll, she admonished. What you have there is a summoning contract for scorpions. Suddenly, the worn scroll looked like platinum in Naruto's hand. Wisely, he chose not to mention the contract he had found back in the cave. If he accepted this, but why give this to me? Wouldn't you have more use for it? It was my mother's contract. Kura faltered briefly at his confusion. She passed it on to me in her will. Don't get me wrong. I tried to summon them a few times, but they never did accept me. So, I wanted you to have it. Her hands wrung nervously together above her stomach. For everything you've done, in that instant, Naruto couldn't put his emotions into words. His mouth failed him utterly. It wasn't just the gift. Rather, it was the fact that Kura seemed all too willing to part with it. It was clearly a painful reminder of her past, one she didn't want to be burdened with. So she'd given it to him, humbled, he tucked it into his pouch. Many thanks, my lady. So if you're a knight, I guess that makes me a damsel in distress. Then she continued with a flushed face. I mean, you did save my life after all. And now this. You keep praising me, and yet I've done nothing but feel sorry for myself these last 2 days. But hearing those words, I almost want you to praise me more. She finished in a tiny plaintive voice that made him want to sweep her into his arms and kiss all those worries away until she was woe. Nar clamped one hand over his mouth and feigned a cough while in reality he just barely stifled a sudden trickle of blood from his nose. Where had that come from? Naren, Era, it's nothing, he muttered, looking away. Hurt flickered across Kura's visage for the span of 2 beats, but it may as well have been an eternity for all it seared into his brain. Mentally, he smacked himself silly for the slip. Gar's mom. Gar's mom. Gar's mom. Gar's mom. Sasake's mother was one thing, considering he'd never liked the prick and found Makoto to be marvelously attractive. But this was Gar's mother. There was nothing to stop him from taking advantage of these feelings she had for him. Worse, a small part of him wanted to. But he respected Gar as a friend and a dear one at that, and this felt like a betrayal of his very existence. Yet on another level, would this bring the Suna siblings back into the world? Tamari and Conqueror certainly, perhaps even Garo, the temptation was great, too great. It was enough to make him sigh, leaving him painfully aware that while Kura might have no idea what he was really like, Nar did. She might think him a hero, a bloody savior and such, but he wasn't. Not by any stretch. What kind of knight let his damsel die? This one had. It didn't matter if he walked differently, talked differently, had new face, a new body, even an entire new skill set. Despite all these new trappings at his core, he was still the same person. Still, Uzuzuki Nar still a failure. I just looked different. A stray glance in a nearby puddle reminded him just how different this face really was. It still had the general shape of his visage, but that was it. No whiskers, pale skin, dark eyes, still the hair only slightly shorter for Kura's valiant efforts to cut it. Those dark bangs certainly belonging to Chiamatera. And now he had the Mangekyo sharing, which may or may not be eternal. Lovely. Thank God he still had his own voice, or he might have gone star crazy by now. And if he did, Naruto Dono Hakura was suddenly there, jerking him back to reality with a gentle tug on his sleeve. The Gateswa reining himself in the Uchiha turned just in time to notice that they were in fact swinging open the welcome landscape of Konohagure stretching out beyond for miles in either direction. Evidently, the centuries had seen fit to allow them passage back into the village, no questions asked. Sometimes it really was good to be known. It was even better to push forward to stride into those empty streets and remain unaccosted. A few short days ago felt so much longer now he'd been maliciously manhandled by Andu when he'd come through here with Kusha. Now they snapped off sharp salutes to him. Evidently word of his success preceded them. Home sweet home. Jiraiya sighed, spreading his arms as though to welcome a long-lost friend. Man, has it really only been 3 weeks? Feels like we just left, Orochimaru murmured, but he too seemed grateful to be home. Goo, I need a shower, Tsunade muttered, lifting an arm and sniffing. I've got sand in all the wrong places. Naoki's going to give me hell. Forget your kid, brother. Let's have a drink. Nar laughed at that, the familiar feeling of a mission well done momentarily driving away the darkness from his mind. For a moment, he felt utterly at ease, completely relaxed in the presence of the soon-to-be Sannin alongside Pakura and Kura. There was a slight awkwardness between those two, but nothing that couldn't be ironed out. Now, all he had to do was keep himself under control until he could sort out the tangle knot. He called his heart and decided what his next move would be. Then, the Anbu closed in. Names, an ox-faced Anbu, presumably their captain, immediately asked of Pakura and Kura. Pakura, formerly of the Sand. Karura, also formerly of the Sand. Very good. The Anbu captain nodded, his masked visage reflecting nothing, not even the pretense of satisfaction. We have already been informed of the terms of the treaty. Until space can be made available, you will share quarters with Uchiha Naruto. Is this acceptable? Pakura blinked. Kura squeaked. The reactions of Tsunade and her teammates were less tame. Why the hell is he that lucky? Cuckoo, you knew about this. I didn't know, Naruto snapped, sharing and flaring in aggravation as he turned himself back to the Anu. Look, there's no need for that. The reply was curt as it was careless. The law is clear. Uchiha Nar newly instated shinobi must be kept under surveillance at all times until their probationary period is ended. There can be no exceptions. There was a silence between the two men, one in which Naruto was very tempted to fry the rule-abiding shinobi with a well-placed Amaterasu. At last, he sighed, sharing fading to black once more. I suppose that applies to me as well. There was a murmur of confusion through the ranks. Glances were exchanged and words whispered. You weren't informed, sir. The captain asked, Sir Hokage-sama named you a jonin as of yesterday. The ceremony is to be tomorrow. Another salute. I for one look forward to working with you, sir. There was something about that man's tone that genuinely struck him off. It was far too respectful for a man who by all rights outranked him. Bordering on outright difference, even only one clan had shown him such blind obedience. Uranuia, it was not a question. There was a moment of silence. Then, yes, sir. He didn't drop the salute. My son Obito just started in the academy. I speak to him of you often, and I take it you weren't told. Naruto nearly choked on his own spit. He was speaking to Oito's father, a man he had never met, the very same Uchiha who had fathered the most heinous villain in all of history. Willing himself not to react, he continued to maintain his facade of Uchi indifference. Something else the old man elected not to mention. He had assigned my squad to watch you at all times while you were within the village. Sir, on what grounds? Nar was surprised by that one. He didn't think Serbi cared that much for his well-being. On the grounds that he fears you might lose your temper and burn someone. Sir, half the group Nar included sweat or doped at that lone remark figures. And is that edict still in effect? Nasir, as a jonin of Konoha, you do not require Andu supervision. But should you ever need assistance, you have but to ask for Uchiyama. Dark brows furrowed in surprise. So the old monkey had been serious after all. There were so many resources laid out before him as a jonin. He almost didn't know what to do with them. But the news that Obito's dad was essentially in service to him, that was something to be remembered. Many thanks for your discretion. I believe the Hokage failed to mention this to me. Is there anything else of which I should be made aware? Any other ceremonies or task of monumental importance that I need to tend to? Before the sun rises if you please. After a pause, the ox-masked continued much to Naruto's consternation. Uchiha Makoto has also requested your presence at your earliest convenience. It's nearly midnight. She was most insistent, sir. He wasn't about to go into detail on that. Not with company. I'll speak with her tomorrow then. I trust you can be discreet. Yes, sir. You won't even notice we're here. I certainly hope not. I intend to get some sleep. When he turned, the man and his squad were gone. He wasn't kidding. What did I say about speaking? Done know something about flaying me with my own spine. If open my mouth I walked right into that, didn't I? Yes. A muscle jumped in Naruto's jaw. Yes, you did. And the spine goes snaap. Oh, wow. Okay. I'll be quiet. If you're uncomfortable, the girls can room with me until they find a place of their own. Suggested, mistaking his pleased grimace for one of actual regret. Ooh, now that I like the sound of wham. One dented head later and Jera was sorely regretting those words. I didn't mean it like that. Yam purr, I'll take him to the hospital. Orochimaru sighed, grabbing the now insensate shinobi by the scruff of his collar. Thankfully, they're open all hours. Please do. Naruto blinked as he watched the pair depart, genuinely touched by earlier nonviolent gesture. It would be so easy to pawn the girls off on her for a few nights, wouldn't it? But no, he couldn't allow himself to be skittish just because Kura might or might not have feelings for him. He simply didn't have that liberty, Pakura. Now that was another matter entirely. At least she knew to rein herself in. You sure about this? She asked, drawing him aside. Yeah, Naruto shrugged. What else could he do? It wasn't as though he could just turn Pakura and Kura away because he didn't feel like dealing with them. It's my fault that they're here in the first place on a level. I feel responsible for them. A man needs to own up sometimes, Yano. Well, he almost jumped when she laughed at him. Keep that attitude up and I'll end up falling for Yatu. See you in the morning, kid. Nar grunted as she slugged him the shoulder. How before departing with the others, muttering something about taking a long cold shower. Try as he might, he couldn't bring himself to shove the last of those words away. Please tell me she was kidding. Right. Quote. Oh, now you've got nothing. No point stating the obvious here, partner. What the writer wants happens. Don't go breaking the fourth wall on me. I'm in control of my own destiny here. Yeah, keep telling yourself that. Out. Well, that solved one problem. Sort of. Hopefully. Now he was just left with two. One of whom he had no idea what to do with. Unbidden, he risked a glance at Kura to whom he hadn't said a word since nearly dying of a nosebleed. She didn't deserve the cold shoulder. Not after all she'd been through. So, I guess you're getting the grand tour. He huffed. Right this way, then. Naren. Damn, did she have to say his name like that? Stop it. He hissed at his brain, but it wasn't listening. His heart refusing to obey. He needed something, anything to distract him before he did something he'd regret. Oi, Uchiha, there. Nar jerked away from Kura and flung himself around, swinging his head in the direction of the voice, and all the while quietly thanking Kami for timely intervention. There was a roughness in the voice that reminded him of Ka. And yet not this scent too. It was familiar. His nose never lied. In the end, his suspicions were all but confirmed when he saw the clan markings on her face. The hound that stood proudly beside her. A slow blink was all it took for his mind to process this. Yep, she was an Inuzuka. All right, but who? There was no way that could be Hana. And the only other Inuzuka female he knew who had this scent was. Soon. He almost balked, grateful to see a familiar face on one hand, but on the other, just wanting to get the hell away. He didn't trust himself right now. Anger and sorrow and desire were all knotted up inside of him, and the urge to lash and hurt or take someone was rapidly becoming too much of a burden to bear. I know the Ambu just gave you the runaround, and you're probably, so I'll make this quick. She jerked a thumb over her shoulder. Your girl wants Tia now behind him. Pakura bristled. Kura was less subtle about it. Girl, she whispered. Naruto felt the beginnings of a very Uchiha scowl forming on his face. And you're telling me this? Why? 'Cause I owe the old girl a favor. All right, Sunam snored. Nothing special about it. Nar wasn't buying it. And I was kind of curious to see the man everyone's been calling the Black Death. She sniffed, eyeing him up and down. You don't look all that impressive, really. Beside her, Kuromaru barked an affirmative Black Death that was news to Naruto. He wasn't aware his actions in Suna had garnered him a moniker of that caliber. Was I to blame for that one? Or was this yet another scheme of the Case Cage? He would not put it past the man to exaggerate his efforts in Suna for his own gain. Still, the Black Death, it did have a nice ring to it. Konoha already had a white fang after all. Given a couple of years, it would have the Sannin and a yellow flash soon thereafter. Not to mention the bloody Hanabaro. Ah, now that brought a smile to his face. Yeah, the Black Death didn't sound so bad after all. Well, you've seen me, he grunted. Now, shoo, I want to get some shut-eye. She moved to block him. Why don't you make me tough guy? The huskiness of her tone proved more than enough to set his already frayed nerves on edge. She was testing him. In that instant, a small smile stole over his features. Aggression had always been a part of the Inuzuka lifestyle. In all likelihood, some was just playing with him, trying to see whether he was as good as the rumors claimed, or if it was all just exaggeration. If she kept pushing on his buttons like this, she'd learn there was no exaggeration to his skills whatsoever. But this soon wasn't the one who had been tempered by experience. She saw a challenge. Woman, he growled, a bit of Uchiha slipping into his tone. I do not have the patience for this. If anything, that seemed to rile her even more. Then do something about it, girls. Naruto's grin wasn't entirely forced this time. Why don't you pull up a seat? A blink of the eye was all it took to create a shadow clone. I'm about to show you how Konohashbi do battle. It would be good to get some of this thrice damnable anger out of his system anyway. Purge the veins and get the blood pumping. You know, anything was better than the tension arching his spine. Oh, Sun grunted, dropping into a crouch. So, you really want to do this right here, right now? Nar frowned, his gaze ghosting over the streets. Perhaps this wasn't the best place. Is there a training ground nearby? Sun's grin could have made the devil himself weep. As a matter of fact, so why is Nar-san doing this? Kura asked, indigo eyes regarding the scene laid out before them with nervous trepidation. Because he feels that he must. But aren't they allies? It's just a friendly spar. Kura spars in Suna were never friendly. No, they weren't. Hakura stifled a small sigh as she watched her would-be husband face off against the Inuzuka in the rather aptly named Training Ground 13. Kura may have been in the dark in regards to the latter's anger, but the answer was blatantly obvious to an experienced kunoichi such as her herself. She knew Nar was feeling guilty, not just for failing to save that young man back in Suna, but for the situation that had wrested the two of them out of their village in the first place. He was incredibly kind in that regard. But sometimes that empathy could be a weakness. When one cared too much, they were affected by things that should not be on their minds, thoughts that would otherwise not bother them in the slightest. The Uchiha was clearly suffering because of it. She'd have to talk to him about that. But for now, she contented herself to watch him vent his aggression the only way he knew how. By fighting Gatsuga, fang over fang, Naruto didn't even need the Sharingan. He'd seen the attack so many times from Ka, it was almost child's play to dodge. They always liked to lead from the front, preferring head-on attacks to the discreet tactics of the more stealthy shinobi. Some didn't disappoint. Her and Kuromaru's first rotation drilled harmlessly past him and through the grounds, the original and the clone seeing through her frontal attack and simply stepping to that effect, each taking up a flanking position on either side of the field. It was Ka's own refusal to change his tactics that had gotten him killed during the war. By the look of it, he'd inherited that from his man. Her attacks and those of her partner were wild yet unfocused, shearing only a straight line forward, easy to dodge and even easier to counter. That was a weakness. Honestly, it was amazing she'd lived long enough to have kids. Naive, he reprimanded, leaping to meet her in midspin, boot shooting out to catch her flank, the offending sandal rudely slamming her into the dirt. Your technique is powerful, but you lack freedom of movement. Thanks for the tip. To his surprise, Sum instantly adjusted, caroming off the earth and into a nearby tree to attack at another angle. Were it not for his superior speed, she might have actually grazed him. As it were, Kuromaru shredded the clone he'd created only a few moments ago, sending its memories roaring back into his mind. Interesting. Apparently, the doppelganger wasn't fast enough to dodge. Interesting to note, he'd always wondered why his shadow clone's bunchons were slower than him. Now he understood. Just because he had been expecting that attack didn't mean his clone was. It was child's play to create another one, but he would remember just how quickly the last one had been dispelled. Very interesting indeed. Whatever you say, Mr. Observant. You're just enjoying the chance to kick some and blow off some steam. Your words, not my oof. Got you, Cuba. The air rushed out of Naruto's lungs in a surprised grunt as Sun scored her first clean hit of the match, blunting her claws just enough to knock the wind out of him rather than leave his innards falling out of his grasp. He staggered back 2 steps, shocked, not that she'd actually been able to hit him, but that it actually hurt. So long had he become so accustomed to having Kurama blunt the pain from injuries, mend his wounds, that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be deprived of that resistance. And damn it, it hurt. Hey, Sun thumbed at her nose. Looks like you're not so tough after all. Samuchiya, you're the her words ended in a strangled yelp as Naruto's hand grabbed a fistful of her hair and made her face intimate with the earth in a way no self-respecting kunoichi desired. She was up again almost instantly, writhing out of his grasp, but the way he was looking at her made her heart skip a beat. That wasn't the look of a man feeling sorry for himself. Those were the eyes of someone who was terribly angry, horribly furious, and about to kick her, to be precise. Oh, balls. Maybe I shouldn't have hit him so hard. Nar was of a similar mind, sweeping her aside with ease when she tried another rotating fang, effortlessly redirecting her and her partner into a tree. Still no Sharingan, only eyes of hardened charcoal regarded her, smoldering darkly in the moonlight. Something in those eyes made her heart skip a beat. They reminded her of an alpha and a very small part of her quailed in submission. But Sum was nothing if not stubborn, and she refused to go down with a fight. She yielded to no one. Let's go. Kurumuru Gatsuga. The Uchiha didn't bother to move as they tore toward him. He simply raised a hand and cracks his knuckles. Pain. One moment soon hurtled forward. The next, her back greeted one of 3 logs that had been here for as long as she could remember. That didn't bother her. What bothered he was, those logs were on the side of the yard. He'd launched her with a single punch. The Uchiha's other hand was occupied with Kuromaru, his offensive hand clutching the dog's throat in a firm grip, ignoring the hound's admirable attempt to snap at the wrist. His expression downright terrified her now, as if something awful had awoken inside of him, an evil so horrifying she couldn't help but flinch aside in fear for herself and her ally. Kuro, take him. Snorting, he flung her partner at her, their bodies colliding painfully. Both Shinobi and Hound were up again in an instant, but the opponent they faced was not the same as then before, his devil-may-care attitude having returned with a vengeance thanks to their beating. He didn't care anymore about Kura, Pakura, or even this damned woman who was messing with him. No one hit him like that and questioned his manhood. There was no point in questioning his every action when all it earned him was pain. No more feeling sorry for himself. Mourning over what he could have done was like trying to stop the rain from falling. It simply didn't get him anywhere. Did nothing but waste time and hurt himself in the end. Time to accept their consequences and come what may. For starters, Soon was going down and she was going down the only way he knew how. Hard. As Soon whistled past him again, he subtly reached down and tagged her on the back with a palm. Horizon, a small seal spread no larger than the edge of his thumb spread from his fingers and etched itself into the back of her flak jacket as blurred by. Surely it wouldn't hurt to use the technique now, would it? He hadn't been able to use it back in Suna. Both having not marked anything and fear of someone seeing an Uchiha use it wouldn't do for him to be stealing his father's title now, would it? But here in the safety of the village, it was the perfect tool for smacking some sense into a stubborn Anuka. How ironic. He had that very woman to thank for knocking some sense into him. All right, that's enough for one night, he declared, twirling away. I don't feel like playing with you anymore. What do you mean? Sun barked out, frowning as her clawed hand came within inches of his face. We're just getting started. No, we're just wrapping up. He feinted a strike at her stomach, palming a smoke bomb in the same instant and lobbing it at the older Inuzuka. Sum's palm rose to intercept it immediately, exactly what he'd planned. And in that instant, both the original flung a kunai, the deadly dagger, striking the cod bomb before she could think to dispose of it. Foom. Into the smoke Oki, and his clone blurred forwards, faster than the eye could comprehend. Pakura thought she beheld a black flash in that instant, a flicker of motion so rapid she almost didn't recognize it. Kuromaru's yelp was the only thing they heard within the plume of dust and debris, followed by a very female cry of pain. Hey! When the smoke finally cleared, both Kura and Pakura were baffled to find Soon pinned by Naruto, her canine partner likewise locked in a full Nelson by a clone. True to his word, the Uchiha had beaten the Inuzuka at her own game, trapping her in a very calm arpizing position to her great dismay. Pakura hissed a quiet curse under her breath. Not only had Nar knocked Sum to the ground, but he'd straddled her, trapping both arms above her head with his hands, his body leaning over hers. Earth Jutsu, she was a prisoner in his grasp. And everyone, even Sum herself, knew that it was over. Give up, Nar grunted as his prey began to struggle. You've lost, TCH. Sum snorted, defiant to the last, her hazel eyes boring furiously into his. You think I'm afraid of a little foreplay? I think you're afraid of more than that. His voice was rough in her ears. When had his teeth been so damnably sharp, body pinning hers with its weight? Or perhaps it's just my imagination. A small gasp pushed itself through her teeth as he leaned forward and nipped her neck with his teeth, unintentionally biting down on the one soft spot between jaw and ear that almost every female in Asuka possessed. Just like that, Soon turned to putty in his hands, her back arching with a soft mewl of pleasured surprise, a pleasant wave of warmth filling her face. The harder she fought, the faster she lost herself to it. Kura clamped a hand over her own face, all but steaming from embarrassment. Naren, Pakura was more shell-shocked than anything. Was Nar really like this, or was this just an act? Give up, Nar purred silky, his words smooth as honey in Sum's ear, or I make it painful. You bastard. Every word was a struggle to her now as she fought to resist the alpha towering over her. Like a lit nip would do me in. How about this then? Nar twisted his leg in her, bringing a knee lower to rest against a particularly sensitive bundle of nerves. Soon whimpered, he'd do it, too. Without a second thought, whomever he'd been before their battle, he wasn't that man now. He had accepted something, embraced a part of himself that he hadn't before. He was an alpha now, a leader born and bred, and she realized too late she'd been a fool to challenge him. Ow. Okay, I give. Smart move. He rolled off her, leaving her body brimming with unfulfilled want and need. Part of her wanted to pounce him then and there, but somehow she managed to rein herself in. Barely. Well, she grumbled. Guess the rumors weren't exaggerated after all. You kicked my told you I would. He could have been a great deal more polite about it. But now he was simply too tired to care. He just wanted to get back to his apartment and fall into bed. If memory served, he was going to have a long day tomorrow. Cammy being a jonin was already proving to be more trouble than it was worth. And what the hell was it with all these females? It was almost enough to make a guy down boy. There it was again. He was losing himself. He needed to get out of here, find someplace safe, somewhere quiet before he screwed someone silly. What the hell? Soon coughed into the ground. What are you doing? Going to bed. Nar gave a jaw-popping yawn as he rubbed the back of his neck. It's my win just like I said it would be. If you want another spar, you can always try me tomorrow. No. Don't do it, partner. She scares me. Good. With that, he stripped it away from the prone Anuka, returning his attention to the girls. Alright, ladies. I think we're going to call it a night before anything else screws with my sleep schedule, he said, and simply scooped Kuro up in one arm and his Pakura in the other before hurling the three of them into the village with a single chakra-enhanced bound. Everyone's shout of surprise was oddly satisfying. Within seconds, they were down the way around a corner and all but out of sight. And he did just that, leaving a very confused Soon to blink at their retreating backs. The Inuzuka shivered. Damn it, he didn't even use his sharing. Is he that good? Kuromaru whined plaintively, pawing at his snout. Sun licked her lips. Now that's my kind of man. Kuromaru dead panted. What? I don't have to go after him right now. I can wait. Her partner barked a negative. ... I'm very patient. Miles into the village, Naruto shivered as he unlocked the door. He had the succinct feeling he'd just opened the Pandora's box of the Inuzuka clan. Ah, well, nothing he couldn't handle. It wasn't as though she could tie him down and rape him. Right. Saratobi would never allow that to happen. Right. Okay. Now, in case you forgot, I said she scares me. Me. That's saying something. Hush. Here we are, he said, flicking on the lights and ushering them inside just as the rain began to fall outside. The clouds finally unleashing their summer bounty upon the village. Home sweet home. Unlocking the door, he swung it open and ushered the duo inside. A low rumble of thunder greeted their ears as he flicked on the lights. Hopefully, that wasn't ominous at all. His home, if it could be called such, was relatively out of their way. Housed on an open patch of land that had never been claimed for some odd reason. It's small, Kurura remarked, stepping inside. I rather like it, Pakura replied, sidling up to him. He almost jumped when she kissed him on the cheek. He wasn't used to such untoward displays of affection. In that case, so did I. Kura was swift to reverse her stance, and before Naruto could stop her, she claimed the other cheek in a nervous kiss. Lucky bastard. Yumi was beside himself with envy. Why do you get all the girls, but I don't get any Lou? Shut up. I mean, if you're going to have this many the least you'll need is a bigger house. Hate to admit it, but you've got a point there. On that much, they agreed. His apartment was relatively Spartan in style. He really didn't have anything in the way of personal belongings. It had been a gift from the Hokage. Remember chapter 3 there, folks. And in the short time that he'd had the property simply hadn't occurred to him that he might want to spruce it up or even move in with Makoto and the other Uchiha. All doubt he was now a part of their clan. He simply couldn't bring himself to associate with them on a day-to-day basis. Not yet. Mikto was about the only one he could stand, and that was saying something. This is where you want to live, though. Kura glanced around, inspecting the pale blue walls for dust. Don't look so stark, her senior admonished. Did you expect something grandiose? I don't know. Hey, it's only temporary. Despite himself, Nar blanched. There was a bedroom, kitchen, den, and toilet. That about summed it up. He'd have to expand the place soon, add a second floor, maybe a guest room or two. There was so much he could improve upon, it was almost mind-boggling. True to their nature, his sharing took the idea and ran with it. Oh, he could put a training yard out by the porch, tack on addition there, maybe even add a hot tub if he knocked down that wall. There was plenty of room to work with if he just set himself to the task. Naruto paused, his scarlet sight falling upon an oddity in his quarters. Alarm bells went off in his head almost immediately. The bedroom door was open a crack. Pakura and Kura didn't seem to notice it. They seemed to be focused on the small kitchen in the hall. Without thinking, he left them there. Another rumble of thunder reverberated through the small home, punctuated by a sharp crack of lightning from just beyond. Frowning, he reached for the handle, twisted it open. A hand snapped out, dragging him down into the darkness of his room. What the surprise! He was just about to fend them off when a familiar silken voice cruned in his ear, soft lips nibbling at his neck. His body surrendered up almost before he realized it. Shoulders slumping as she took control, pushing him back onto the bed as though he weighed no more than a feather. Before he could rise, she was suddenly there, straddling him, curves melting neatly with his hips, arms draping around his neck, pulling him into the most soul-searing kiss of his lifetime, one that left him aching for more. Makoto, shush. She kissed him again, her mashing up against his chest and evoking a brand new sort of ache. I missed you. Missed you, too. The words tore themselves out of his throat because they were true. He had missed her. His body had burned for every moment that they were apart. To be reunited with her out of the blue, when least expected, it was nothing short of pure bliss. Without thinking, his arms spread themselves across her bare back. Want and abandon, devouring her skin, the distance between them, everything. Makoto. She'd been waiting for him here in his room. That last bit explained a great deal in his mind. Too late. His pleasure-addled brain realized the chain of events about to occur. He'd left Pakura and Kura back in the hallway. And if they were decent shinobi, no doubt they would be bursting into his room any second now. Wham! Less than a second later, the door flung itself open and the lights flicked on, exposing the baffled faces of said kunoichi. Nar. Makoto paused in her ministrations, dark eyes regarding the newcomers contemplatively as one would when choosing furniture. Who are these two? The clan Ays frowned tamely. Their reactions were anything but. Why is she kissing you? Who is she? Naren. Nar swallowed. Fear. True fear. The very same that made you pale. That seemed to extinguish your very essence. Scare. Fright. Dread. Panic. Heart pounding out of your chest. You begin to falter. It's hard to think clearly, hard to react in time. Let alone swiftly. A split second. All of that for a seasoned warrior only lasts a split second. Even when faced with the imminent threat of fate, extending its baneful shadow over all he holds dear. So, it was that Uchiha Naruto took a very deep breath to compose himself, realizing this moment had been long in coming. He'd already had his hands full with the prospect of preventing Ma's ascendance. Now this, the very idea of balancing a love life with more than one woman was daunting. But in the same vein, he wasn't willing to relinquish the bonds he'd created. Makoto understood him in a way that Pakura never would. And Pakura empathized with him on the burden of being little more than a pawn in the plans of another. Something someone of privilege someone like Makoto could never hope to understand. And Kurakami, bless her young heart, was doing her best to cling to her sense of self just as he had done when he'd been starting out on his road to a ninja. Makoto, I'd like you to meet Pakura and Kura. They're going to be living with me for the time being. To her credit, Makoto didn't explode. She simply rose and started to dress herself, tugging on the robe she'd worn to his apartment, cinching it shut with a savage motion. Ah, Yumi muttered. Where are you going? Nar asked. Home. Her voice was positively frigid, her face the emotionless mask he'd first seen at Ikyaku all those weeks before. It's obvious you no longer have any interest in me. Everything hurt, but she wouldn't show her tears. She was an Uchiha and she was too proud to cry in the presence of strangers. She longed to lash out and break something, but her rigid self-control would not allow even that. So, she started towards the door, determined not to cry, only to start as his hand closed around her wrist. Let go of me, she whispered. I can't do that. Anger flashed in those charcoal orbs when he didn't flinch. Could he see how he'd hurt her? She nearly spat at him when he spoke again. Sit down. No. His gaze hardened. Makoto. I said sit down. Is that all you have to say? She couldn't quite suppress a sob, no longer able to keep the tears from falling across her features. No, you two-timing bastard. You, I said, sit down. That voice, those sharing allowed no room for any argument whatsoever. It was like trying to argue with Kami. The Uchiha heiress found herself inexplicably obeying before she knew what was happening. No one is leaving this room until I say so. One look at the Manekio sharing all but trumped any argument the kunoichi could hope to form. To challenge him to look into those eyes overlong meant certain doom. Oddly enough, neither of the Suna shinobi had uttered so much as a word. They simply stood there, shocked, yes, but not questioning him as she had done. As if they understood something she did not. What was it? What was she missing here? I care for you. The words were soft, genuine. But I care for them, too. I'm not throwing you away, but I'm not discarding them either. His hands held hers tightly, caging them, preventing any momentary lapse of judgment on her part. She didn't understand. What was he saying? What did he mean by that? So, what are you saying? I'm saying that I need you here with me. He dared to release one hand, reach up to cup her cheek. Makoto let him, quietly marveling at the tenderness of his actions and words as he continued. I care about you. I'd sell my very soul to keep you here with me. Hell, I think I might even be falling for ya. Color flooded her cheeks in a rush, the back of her neck burning as those words hit home. What the hell? Surely he wasn't trying to say that he low. But I need them here with me, too. His gaze slipped to Pakura and Kura, and there was such love in those black orbs that she almost startled. They're precious to me, and no matter how much I might care for you, I can't just throw them away for your sake to make you happy. I didn't want this. Didn't ask for it, but it's how I feel. If you really want nothing to do with me anymore, then feel free to walk on out that door. I will not stop you. I swear on my Nindo. But if any part of you cherishes what we have, take it. That's all I ask. I really don't want to lose you, Baka. A single sob of a word. The blink of an eye. Then Makoto crashed into him, knocking him backwards onto the bed and showering him with kisses. She'd made her decision. Take it or leave it. Makoto took it. Only 3 weeks since their little tryst in the training grounds, and already she couldn't bear the thought of being living without him. There was more than a certain charm about him, more than the fact that he treated her like a normal person. It was somewhat stupid and selfish of her to want him all to herself, but that didn't change the fact that she cared. She wanted him by her side, and if she had to share him with others, no matter how many, it was a price she was willing to pay. Well, that actually worked, Pakura murmured. Told you, Nar replied cheekily. Although I wasn't expecting it to be this soon, you're not opposed to this either. Makoto was in disbelief. The Sunyuna Kunoichi shook her head, bangs tossing from side to side. I swore myself to Naruto Dono the day I left Suna. There's no other path for me. Besides, I knew from the beginning that his bonds were precious to him. I have no intention of challenging that which he holds dear. It is my honor to meet you, sister. Makoto balked. And you? Her gaze fell upon Kura. Well, Naruto-san is the reason I'm here in the first. So her head jerked down in a clumsy bow. Pleased to meet you as well, Makoto-sama. Great, Naruto sighed, wriggling out from under the Uchiha Aris in an impossible movement. Now that's settled. I'd really like to get some rest. Hold it. Ha. Makoto's sharing flared. I haven't seen you for 3 weeks. She licked her lips. Did you really think I'm letting you get away that easily? Ha ha. Can't this wait until morning? He gulped as Pakura moved to pin his right arm and Kura his left. Traitors, the both of them. No. Makoto smiled far too sweetly. Now lay down. Nar's sweat dropped as she pushed him back onto the bed. All the strength sapping from his spine as the 3 girls closed in on him. Balls. He wouldn't be getting any sleep tonight. Meanwhile, deep within the bowels of the hospital bed, a bandaged body twitched. Stirred, awakening from the coma for the first time in nearly a month. He was alive impossibly. His body still drew breath, alone, eye blurrily held onto the ceiling, staring at the white plaster with murderous intent as though he could somehow bore through the walls of his prison to find the man responsible for his wounds. His right arm may have been severed, his left eye all but destroyed by the blaze. But the eye that remained carried incredible power. Power that only he knew of. Awakened by what he'd thought had been his death, the Mangekyo sharing, his pride had been shattered, his body broken, his woman stolen, but he still had his life. STLL had his eye, and he swore with every fiber in his being that he would make Moa's descendant pay. He did not know how, did not, now when, only that he would make him pay, see him suffer before he died. His very being was consumed with this desire. As his career had been taken from him, so too would he take everything out of his fellow man. MCK him MW. Ho. An unfamiliar voice cooped. You survived after all. HNRG. Bandaged. Though he might be, the man strained, his lone eye balefully turning to regard he who dared to trespass upon his brooding. The figure he saw was one of pure white, nothing more. Their body was warped and strange, horribly deformed to gaze upon. It leaned down, smiling at them. Do you want revenge? The man in white grinned. Do you want to hurt the one who did this to you? The burned man nodded fervently. Good. The creature cooed. You'll be a useful pawn. Mouth muffled by bandages. Uchiha Fugaku growled a name low and deep in his throat. He would work with this strange creature and the man who controlled it. He would make his oppressor suffer. Uchiha Nar 12 hours later on. That's why I'm so tired. Nar relayed to Serbi the next morning, utterly unaware of the nemesis he'd created. Longest night of my goddamn life. One had only to look at him to know he spoke the truth. His eyes were dark and hooded. Deep bags a silent testament to last night's conquest. He'd never come so close to a heart attack thanks to Makoto, and he'd nearly had Aneth there after convincing her to accept Pakura and Kura in the first place. He'd attended the ceremony for his new rank earlier in the day with stoic indifference, but before he'd had a chance to make his escape, he'd been nabbed once more. Yet again, he found himself in the Hoag's office, and when the latter had asked why he looked so tired, it had all spilled out. So, I take it they decided not to kill you. Worse, they decided to share. I don't see the problem there. Hai replied. An knowing smile tugging at his lips. You make it sound as though you had a wonderful time last night. Wonderful. Ento shrieked. Don't you get it? I spent all night screwing 3 girls silly. Oh, sure. It was great for the first hour or 3, but it didn't stop. There was no sleep involved. None. None at all. Do you have any idea how tired I am? No. Of course you don't. Because what you do doesn't involve missions or kunoichi or anything dangerous, just piles and piles of paperwork. And I swear to God, if you were watching me again last night, I'm going to take that crystal ball of yours and shove it so far up you'll be crapping crystal for the rest of your goddamn life. There was a silence broken only by Naruto's labored breathing. Do you feel better now? Surbi asked pleasantly. The Uchiha gasped out of breath. Actually, yeah, I kind of do. Good. Impossibly, the old monkey smiled. To answer your question, no, I wasn't watching you, though I feel your outburst is warranted. I may have placed my trust in you, but I've also laid a great burden upon your shoulders in the process, and for that, I apologize. You may be new to the vlog, but I say without a doubt that your loyalty is unquestionable. An enemy shinobi would have jumped at the chance to destabilize relations between us and Suna. Thanks to you, I won't have to send Tsukumo on that mission to the border after all. Mission. Nar blinked, vaguely recalling how Hideki Tsukumo had perished for failing to complete a mission. Did I just do what I think I did without trying? Yes. Still, something bothered him. Surbi wasn't one to apologize unless he was tossing you out of the frying pan and into the fire. Nar smelled an assignment coming. And you're doing this because I'm sending you on your next mission. The Sandaime replied, his expression serious as the grave. I've already trusted 3 of my students with this. They departed just this morning. Recent intelligence has suggested, however, that reinforcements are required. Naruto's heart skipped a beat where the land of rain called it shut up aim. Naruto's excitement was well concealed, although his deadpan at the very thought of being flung into an active war zone was not. I just get back from Suna, get promoted, and the first thing you do is send me to AIM. I wish it were otherwise, but you have proven yourself too capable. His replied, steepling his fingers. Your actions in Suna garnered a great deal of attention after all. He made no mention of Pakura and Kura. It was an unspoken fact that Naruto had made a coup by securing the 2 kunoichi for Konoha. Regardless of what some might think, I've also taken your idea of investigating Kiri into consideration, but AIM is clearly the greater threat at present. If you'd like, I could earmark it for you upon your return. The idea of recruiting other clans to the village in this time of crisis is simply too good to pass up. Yes, he wanted to shout and skip, but he kept himself composed. So, what's the mission? A rank is matter of fact. And Nar pressed. Surbi continued. Hanzo's been making trouble along the border for too long now and needs to be dealt with. Kill him if you can. Drive him off if you can't. As I said before, I've already sent Jiryakin and the others on ahead. If your team hurries, you should be able to catch up with them. Besides, he continued at the latter's groan. These 3 are quite capable. As I'm sure you'll see, they'll become Chunin in no time. Naruto's only response was to pinch the brow of his nose. Let me guess. I have no say in this whatsoever. It would have been terribly easy to outright defy the old man, but that only served his pride, and pride wouldn't get him anywhere. Not in this time. There would be time to argue the issue later. So, for now, he quietly demurred and accepted his fate this time. But if the old man kept sending him off on suicidal missions like this, he might have to take offense or his own life would be forfeit. None at all. Now see for yourself. As if on cue, a soft knock sounded on the door. Ah, there they are now. Come in. 2 entered, closing the door behind them. I would like you to meet your team. Naruto's brow furrowed as he beheld the 2 assembled before him by Sarutoi. He'd fought and railed against this from the moment he'd set foot back in Konoha. But in the end, cooler heads had prevailed. So here he was in the old man's office, silently ruining his new rank as Jonin. He recognized a young Naoki Sinu almost immediately. The face was a dead giveaway. So was the necklace supposedly cursed. According to Shizune, he'd have to find a way to make him part with it, or barring that, make certain that the lad didn't get himself killed. The other boy, he didn't know. He had silver hair like Kakashi, but there was no way it was his sensei. Kakashi was still a kid in the academy if he recalled correctly. It wasn't until Serbi identified him as Ibiki Morino that he actually got a rise out of Naruto. Oh, this was rich. The man had scared the crap out of him when he was a kid, but now the tables were turned. Speaking of tables, where was the third student? He counted a pair of boys, not the 3 whelps the Hokage had promised him. Serbi seemed to realize it as well. Where is Yusuzuki Kusha? He asked. Naruto's head snapped around so quick it might have flown clear off his neck. Somewhere in the back of his mind, his darker half cackled. Naruto only had one word for them both. No, yes, Hiruzen answered immediately, ignoring the killing intent that flooded the room. She hasn't had a sensei since her last one died in action a year ago. As she seems quite attached to you, I deemed it fitting. She's too old. A genin is a genin. The Sandaime remained unmoved by his plight. Besides, and here he did become him closer. You're one of the few shinobi who can control her should it attempt to breach the seal again. I trust you will treat this matter with the utmost discretion. Before Naruto could even hope to answer, a voice was heard from beyond the door. Those fools weren't arm wrestling. They were playing life-death match. TTE Bane. Hi, one of the Anbu answered. Go right on in. Instead of opening slowly, the door flung itself open with a resounding crash, admitting a blur of orange and black. Utsuaki Kasha, reporting for duty ga. Nar, she skidded to a grinding halt, eyes wide at the sight of him. When did you get back from your mission? Yo, just last night, the Uchiha colored at the sight of the girl's enthusiasm. Beautiful as ever, her long lustrous red hair trailing after her loud entrance, Hishi-8 strapped proudly to her forehead. And was she wearing orange? It was almost enough to draw a smile to his face, the sight of his favorite color stirring up fond memories deep within his heart. Still, the scowl refused to depart from his face. Saratov's next words only made it deepen. Meet your new sensei, Kusha. Her grin was practically ear-splitting and bloody adorable, he had to admit. Sensei, is there a problem? Nar bit back a groan, resisting the urge to fawn over that adorable face. Kami, preserve him. This was going to be hard. Talk about stating the obvious. Oh my gosh, no breath rushed out of him as she glowed at him, her slender arms squeezing his ribs with enough force to nearly fracture bone. Such strength, what was it with redheads and that? Gasping for air, he loosely patted the kunoichi on the back, quietly grimacing at the affection in her eyes. The girl who might one day give to a Nar in the future was now looking at him like a lost little puppy. He was certain that had she a tail, it would be wagging, and he was going to take her, unprepared, into a war zone. Yeah, even I agree that this is a bad idea. That decided it. I'm afraid I can't do this, Nar said suddenly, worming out of her hold. He did his best to ignore the flash of hurt that tore itself across Kusha's visage. You can't give me 3 untested teenagers and expect me to go off into the middle of a war zone. I need to know what they're capable of at the very least. Barring an outright examination, I can't accept them as they are now. They'll just get themselves killed. If I'm to take on these kids, I need to see what they can do. I need to know that they can work as a team. And what do you propose exactly? Serbi asked. In contrast, Naruto's grin, while positively beatific shivers through his soon-to-be students. Nawaki gulped. Ibiki remained stoically silent. In the end, only a certain redhead blanched at his words. How does a bell test strike you? The genin blinked, baffled. Interesting. His chuckled, having fond memories of such an express. Are you certain they'll survive? Possibly. So be it, then. Glad ya saw it my way, Gigi. Kusha took one look at her sensei to be impromptu gulped. Had she known him, she would have realized Naruto was taking a page from a certain copycat's handbook. This test of which he spoke, it would be hell in its purest form and stretch her newfound feelings for the man to their limit and in time work only to deepen them. But more than that, it would serve as a painful reminder of just how far she needed to come in order to reach her dream. And in surviving this, she would take one more step on the road to greatness. Of course, she knew none of these things, only that Naruto-sensei had something prepared for them. Nar would never deliberately try to kill her. She knew that. But even then, she couldn't quite shake the terrible sensation of dread she felt when she saw that smile. I've got a bad feeling about this. TT Bane AN. And there you have it. Nar finally starts changing things en masse. No one sees him for what he really is, and more he's losing pieces of himself. He remembers what he once was, but more and more he's starting to see just how much a mess he's walked into. And now he has the Mangekyo uncertain of whether or not it will make him blind. Ain't that lovely? On the plus side, he's attracted attention and unknowingly started to ensnare her heart. We've started the AIM arc now here, folks, and Naruto's gone and started a harem. Hope you enjoyed it though with Pakura. So much has happened in this chapter, the consequences of which will be felt far and wide. Fugaku is gunning for Naruto. What sinister underscore is he plotting? We're off to aim next chapter. What fate awaits our heroes? Find out next time on Die Another Day. On another note, the pairing has officially been decided. Although I will gladly take any other recommendations that are offered, Kushin's officially fallen for him. So too have others. Her was voted for overwhelmingly here, so I'll try to keep it realistic here, folks. That's right. Though this story may include a harem, the pairing it's still entirely up in the air. Vote review. Tell me what you want. So in the immortal words of Atlas Review, would you kindly and of course enjoy the preview. Hope you brought your popcorn. Preview. Get the hell away from them. Oh. Hanzo paused, his Kusariyama coming just short of pricking her throat. Uchiha Nar, I presume. You're late. I was expecting more of a challenge from your students. Oh, underscore, don't lose it, partner. Ba dump. A Christ. There he goes. That did it. He thought he had snapped before when he nearly failed to stop Kusha's kidnapping. He'd thought himself insane with anger when witnessed death in Wind Country. But this redefined anger. There was no red haze this time, no sensational of falling in the black, losing himself into the darkness. It was as simple as flicking a switch. One moment he stood there, soaked in the blood of a small army, the next his mind simply ceased to be. He took in the prone broken forms of his students of Kusha, and the Mangekyo flared to life in his eyes. There, standing in the rain, he lost himself. Naro screamed. Susanoo roared into existence around him, black bone and cold chakra writhing its angry tendrils in either direction. Larger it grew, assuming human shape and form, then larger still, its many arms spreading outwards like an ensuru. 6 limbs, 6 swords slashing at the ground in a thrashing frenzy. So great was its fury that the leader of the rain was actually forced to leap backward, seeking shelter atop the head of his mighty salamander, lest he be torn apart by the many blades. One thought stood at the forefront of his mind as he gazed upon the hellish creature that had engulfed the Black Death. What kind of sharing is that? Golden eyes glared out at Hanzo, a rictus of angry teeth parting in ghastly grimace as its master exhaled. 5 words were spoken, then a series of sinister syllables that not only chilled Hanzo of the salamander to the bone, but left him quivering in very real fear for perhaps the first time in his career. So guys, what do you think about this Naruto story? Tell me your opinion in the comments. And if you want more Naruto what if stories, make sure to subscribe to Universe of Naruto. Thanks for watching.